What would happen if Deku had the Ghoul Quirk? Let's find out. But before we start, please hit the subscribe button, like the video if you like this story. Also consider sharing this with your friends, this really helps. Let's start. There's a ringing in his ears without the use of an alarm clock. That same piercing rumbling shakes up his stomach next. And so he wakes up as if there's an emergency, as if sleeping had suddenly become a dangerous thing. Considering his nocturnal nature and the lack of bed rest prior to now, he feels that may very well be true. His heart matches the throbbing rhythm with rapid thumps, as the buzzing segues from his ears to his brain. Akatani feels as though he's hungover, and after effect of some sort of drunken state that leaves him woozy. When he shifts in the bed to sit up, his shoulder screams at him too. Wincing at the sharp sting, Akatani glances at the sore spot to see a bite mark. Suddenly, he's no longer delirious. The ambience fades, and his vision focuses as he sobers up. He's awake and he's able to see that he didn't sleep alone. In the bed next to him is a familiar blonde, her usual buns undone and her hair a mess. The blood in his system goes to his face, making it a bright red hue. Her body is covered by the blankets and sheets, but his imagination gets the better of him. Turning away and smacking his cheeks to calm down, Akatani shakes his head to clear away those impure thoughts. He doesn't recall his quirk has been on the fritz for a while now. It may be from the lack of nourishment, he figures. However, even if that's the case, it's a tad bit concerning. The rustling of sheets behind him has Akatani snapping out of his thoughts and turning back around. Himiko stirs from her sleep, blinking back any remaining sleepiness. "No breakfast?" she asks in a drowsy voice. As flustered as he should be, Akatani keeps his mind honed on the most important factor of the blonde's presence. That was dangerous, what you did. He has to remind himself of the night before and the state he was in when she had found him. He was at his tipping point, and being as close as she was to him in such a starved state of mind, things could have gone horribly wrong, as opposed to how things actually turned out. Himiko, however, doesn't quite comprehend the meaning of what he's saying. Misinterpreting his statement, she blushes a bit while averting her gaze. "We didn't do anything that needed a condom." "That's not what I meant." Akatani's eyes go white as he flails his hands in a wild gesture to make her stop. While he may have been able to keep his embarrassment at bay before, that was enough to send him over the edge. His face heats up more than the girl's. "But you should still take responsibility," Himiko carries on anyways. Whether she didn't hear the boy or just enjoys teasing him is unclear. "Himiko." But Akatani eventually has enough. The blonde stops, hearing the severity in the tone of his shout. His blush fading, Akatani sculls his expression and returns his gaze to hers. "I could have gone too far. What if I didn't stop at drinking your blood? What if I..." His voice trails off, getting caught somewhere in his throat. Now comprehending what he meant, Himiko takes Akatani's hands in hers in an attempt to console him. "Hey, I'm still here. See?" She gives them a soft squeeze to show him that she's alive and well. Sighing, he nods. "Thank you for being here." He can't leave it at that though, but I still think it was too dangerous. He looks deep into her eyes. He has to let her know that she can't do anything like she did last night ever again when he gets like that. Himiko hums, staring back at him. After a moment, she breaks the contact to glance at her shoulder. There's a specifically shaped mark there that matches the one on Akatani's shoulder. "Well, you did bite pretty deep. You leave one heck of a hickey, Akatani." She returns to teasing him in an attempt to lighten the mood. "It works. Sort of." Akatani pulls away, embarrassed and flustered. I gotta call somebody back." He uses his phone as an excuse for unplugging it from its charging cord. Seeing Himiko brows raised inquisitively, he elaborates, "It was about Eri." The blonde instantly beams at that. "Oh. Let me talk to her too. Let me say hi." She's throwing the sheets that cover her off, revealing a white t-shirt with kanji that reads pajamas. Recognizing the shirt as one of his own, Akatani swivels his body to face the opposite direction. He hastily stammers, Sure, before calling Aizawa back. After a few rings, the underground hero picks up. Surprisingly, his voice isn't that groggy. "Problem child. You're lucky I'm up this early." Glancing around for a clock, Akatani winces slightly. "Sorry. I just thought I'd return your call. I didn't really bother checking the time." He bashfully rubs the nape of his neck despite Aizawa not being able to see him. "It's fine. There's nothing to apologize for." Aizawa is quick to allay the boy's worries though. "Well, only momentarily." He's also quick to add, other than not calling before now. "Where have you been?" Oh, yeah, I've been. Akatani struggles for an answer as he tries to come up with a valid excuse or reason to his lack of contact. It's not like he can admit to having a breakdown to a licensed hero who reports to a detective that wants to lock him away. With the lack of an answer, Aizawa makes a guess. "I've made a full recovery now if that's the reason why you've been avoiding me." I haven't been avoiding you." Akatani panics at the suggestion. "Even if it is a little true." "Whatever you say." Aizawa huffs. Hearing how much anxiety is in the boy's tone, the underground hero lets it go for the time being. My point is, you should be able to eat now without putting a strain on me. He instead gets back to the original purpose of their meetings. Akatani hesitates, searching for a response. Thank you. But he's not so sure he's able to face the man after what he's done, or if the eating regime that they developed will even work anymore. You can't tell me you aren't hungry still. Aizawa catches the hesitation in Akatani's tone immediately. Worried about his problem child, he asks, you haven't been doing anything to hold yourself over, have you? No? Akatani shouts a little too forcibly. He grimaces at how hasty he was with his response before toning it down. I mean, no. His eyes are drawn to Himiko, who's been listening in on their conversation the whole time with mild intrigue. My, friend. The blonde frowns. My girlfriend. He tilts his head hopefully. Her frown diminishes and she nods. Hi. She cranes her neck forward to be heard through the phone. I wasn't aware that you weren't alone. Aizawa somehow manages to sound both amused and annoyed. She helps. I mean, her quirk. It can. Akatani slaps a palm against his face when he realizes how terrible he is at communicating between his newly claimed girlfriend and technical probation officer. I don't need to hear the details. Aizawa cuts the boy short. Akatani holds back a sigh of relief, realizing the underground hero is probably just as at ease to drop the subject. He then asks, was she the one behind the blood bank idea? Remembering the time he and her broke into a blood bank, all Akatani can reply with is, oh. He doesn't want to get Himiko into trouble, but answers honestly anyways, yeah, that was her. I had a hunch. Aizawa says with a small smile on his face. Akatani can practically hear the expression on the man's face as he continues, it's better than the alternative, but don't do anything like that again. Yes sir. Akatani allows himself to have a small smile too. So, are you absolutely certain that you don't want to come over for breakfast? The smile slips when Aizawa asks about eating again. Especially when he adds, Iri would love to see you. Akatani's grip on the phone nearly crushes it when he remembers the extent of his craving and what he had fantasized doing. There's no way in hell that he could put her in that type of danger. Could you just put Iri on the phone instead? He tries to keep his emotions in check, but his voice comes out strained. Aizawa must notice by the way he pauses, but he's considerate enough to let it slide. Sure, kid. Akatani holds the phone away from his ear when he hears the sound of rustling and Aizawa calling out, Iri. It's for you. Your brother. Akatanai. Followed by an even sharper shout from the little girl herself. Iri. Hey. Akatani smiles again upon hearing her voice. He holds the phone closer to his ear now that she's talking. Dad said I'd see you soon. The sound of Aizawa choking on his saliva makes Akatani laugh. He wonders how long it's been since Iri started calling Aizawa that. She carries on cheerfully, oblivious to the man's coughing fit in the background, but it's been too long. I know. I wanna see you too. He turns when he feels a tap on his shoulder. Seeing his girlfriend standing behind him, he remembers that he isn't alone. So does Himiko. He gives her an apologetic look before holding out the phone for her. Hi Iri. Himiko flashes her teeth as she grins and speaks into the phone. Big sis. Can she come too? Iri cheers loud enough for both of them to hear without it being on speaker. Akatani shouldn't be as taken back as he is, but it truthfully hadn't dawned on him that the two girls would be missing one another's company too. Well. He scratches the top of his head as his brain tries to process the request and the current situation. Of course I can, silly. Himiko replies just as cheerfully as Iri, as though any other option wasn't even to be considered. This only further eggs Iri on, yeah. Leading her to ask, when, Akatanai, when. When her older brother doesn't respond immediately or as excitedly as the two girls, Iri's tone becomes slightly discouraged and asks again, Akatanai. Though Iri is unable to see the boy's expression, Himiko can. And what she sees is concerning to say the least. The blonde worriedly asks too, Akatani. Reaching out a hand to touch him. Unexpectedly, he stands up straight, making her flinch back. He keeps his expression the same, but talks in a relatively even voice. It's probably gonna be a while, Iri. Oh? Iri tries to keep the whining to a minimum, but her disappointment is evident. Whatever face Akatani had been making falters. The cracks in his mask expose sorrow. A trace of remorse and a wrinkle of regret trail down each of his cheeks like tears. But I want you to remember I'll always love you. You're my little sister. Even if I'm not there, I'll be keeping you safe. His voice cracks just the same as he tries not to expose his feelings any more than he already is. Iri's excitement reignites, mistaking his words for a different meaning. You're gonna be a hero. Not wanting to break her heart with an honest answer, but not wanting to lie, he refrains from responding. Instead, he says, I've gotta go, Iri. Oh? Okay. Iri's mood plummets all over again on the wild rollercoaster of emotion that she's riding. Wanting to save her from any more letdowns, Akatani decides it's best to just end their call. Goodbye. It comes out as a whisper, but Iri hears it. She starts to bid farewell back, bye, but Akatani hangs up before she can. Watching the entire exchange and the boy's stricken expressions, Himiko reaches out with a tender hand. This time, he doesn't spook her by making any sudden movements. He stays as stiff as a stone statue. Akatani. What was that about? Her face crunches up with concern as she tries to study him more closely. When Akatani's eyes meet hers, she thinks that she understands. I'm not going to get my hunger under control, and I won't put her in that kind of danger. I'd never be able to forgive myself. He's still wary of his own quirk and doesn't want to put Eri at risk. You need to stop worrying about hurting us. Himiko starts to assure him otherwise, but he has none of it this time. You know what I'm capable of. He knocks her arm away and pulls back. Before he can go on a rant about his quirk and the dangers of its drawbacks, he realizes that the blonde is hanging her head. Sorry. I didn't mean. He tries apologizing, but Himiko raises her head and fires back. You're forgetting that it's because of who you are and what you can do that I like you. He's shocked by her words and the passionate way that she says them. Remember? You saved me. You saved Eri. Like it or not, you're basically a hero. But he's still not hearing what her or anyone else has to say. He shakes his head, thinking bitterly that they'll just never understand. A hero, huh? He scoffs, but feigns a smile for Himiko anyways. Thanks for not giving up on me. The blonde frowns, gaze lowering. It falls and lands on his shoulder, where she left her mark on him. Akatani notices where she's staring and looks at hers. Each of them blush, but she doesn't pass up the moment. She bumps her shoulder against his, leaning into him. You're stuck with me now. Akatani locks up, not sure how to react. But after a moment, his body relaxes. He closes his eyes and sighs. Conflicted with wanting to be happy with her but also wanting to keep her safe, he tries moving forward with his newfound plan. Himiko. If I'm a hero, then. You remember what I wanted to meet Dabi for, right? His eyes reopen to look at her seriously. Himiko looks up, staring back questionably. That League of Villains thing. Akatani nods, stealing his resolve. I want to find them. They're a danger to Eri. And like I told her, even if I can't be there for her, I'll still continue to keep her safe. He decides right then and there what he's going to be from now on. The ghoul is a monster that had been villainized, but he can at least aim that beast towards those who deserve it. Against Aizawa's better judgment, Akatani is going to leave behind his life at Antiku and commit to being a vigilante. Seeing the determination in his eyes, Himiko can't help but gush in awe. Such a cool big brother. Her face starts to heat up, and she grins before grabbing onto his arm to steer him. Guess I gotta step up and do my part as her big sister. She begins pulling him towards the door so that they can start their new life together. Come on, Akatani. Let's catch a train to Hosu and find those villains. Before either of them can back out and regret that this isn't too early. Blue hues blend with the black of the night. Each blinding array of building lights whizzes by outside the window of the train. The passenger car rocks back and forth on the tracks. With Himiko resting her head on his shoulder, it's almost soothing enough for Akatani to relax. Almost. He can't quite allow himself to enjoy the moment. Not after essentially leaving his whole life behind. Again. He can't help but wonder what Eraserhead and the pro-hero's detective friend will think. Or Yashimar. Or the friends that he made, Todoroki and Shinso. Or Eri. Akatani's head lolls to the side, resting atop Himiko's. He at least allows himself to brood a bit. He thinks about where he's headed instead. Even though that's no better or worse of a thought. He's headed straight for the Inferno, taking the train into Hosu with Himiko to find the League of Villains. Since the hero killer's activity there increased, it seems like the most likely place to find criminals lurking about. Birds of a feather flock together and all that. As a predator, it's easier to hunt and catch prey in packs rather than individually. The odds of snagging at least one from a group is higher than chasing a single target. Akatani just didn't expect to enter a literal inferno. The blue tint outside the train car's window shifts shades of color, from yellow to orange to red. Akatani sits up straight when other people in the car start to murmur over the light show, waking Himiko. Orange and red flares warp the city lights, growing brighter. It takes the spectators too long to realize why. The ball of flame is hurtling towards them, growing closer and burning harder. Akatani wraps his arms around Himiko to shield her, twisting their bodies away from where the ball of fire collides with the train car. Screams fill the metal container as glass shatters, and shards spray across the tiny space. Those same yells are drowned out by the shrill sound of wind being sucked in and out of the giant hole that's been made. Akatani looks up to see what made such damage. A humanoid with green skin as pale as a dying leaf crouches down on all fours. Akatani notes that the being's brain is exposed, 4 eyes protruding from the organ. All they got on are grey trousers that are ripped at the calves. Akatani reaches into the back pocket of his own pants, feeling the leather of his mask. He's not sure whether what's attacking is human or something else, but his fight-or-flight response is telling him to fight. Akatani. Himiko squirms from under the boy's weight, but her indignant whines are more from a place of worry for him than uncomfortability. The other passengers of the damaged train car let loose a round of reactive noises again upon witnessing Akatani's slight transformation. The The long sleek appendages that sprout from the small of the boy's back whip side to side as he pulls on his mask. He leaves the zipper open, baring his teeth like fangs. The red of his Kakugan glows brighter than his Kaguyan, but he's just as bloodthirsty as ever. The humanoid shrieks at the ghoul, a visceral sound that makes everyone cover their ears, but the ghoul himself. From under Akatani, Himiko tries grabbing onto an ankle to stop him from engaging it. But he's too fast. In one rapid and fluid movement, the ghoul tackles the humanoid creature through the hole that it created. They twist and flip in a fast freefall from the monorail to the grounds below, passing rooftops and plummeting straight for the earth. Registering the sudden change of events, Himiko is already standing up to hurry after them. Akatani. She calls after her boyfriend before leaping out of the cart willingly. Admittedly, she wasn't prepared to be woken from her sleep by a sudden villain attack. Now that she's gotten past her grogginess though, she's more than just grouchy. She's pissed. Nobody interrupts her beauty sleep and steals her boyfriend. The blonde unsheathes a knife that she keeps handy, landing in a roll on one of the higher rooftops. Her body aches from the rough tumble, but she catches herself and gets to her feet anyways. At the speed that the train was moving and how long it took for her to follow after Akatani, there's going to be some distance to travel before catching up with him. Though she's seen firsthand that he's more than capable of taking care of himself, she rushes to help him anyways. She has to close the distance as quickly as possible, because she cares too much about him to potentially lose him. As for Akatani, despite his blood and flesh withdrawal, he does handle himself well as Himiko had assumed. He binds the humanoid that he's fighting by its wrists and ankles with his predatory organ, before attacking its exposed brain. His fingers claw at its open organ, ripping an eyeball loose. Gore spews across the alley that they had fallen into, filling the crater they made with a puddle of blood. The next impact in the ground comes from the humanoid alone, slammed into the cement by Akatani. It doesn't show signs of pain, just mere agitation as it tries to resist. The ghoul decides then and there that he doesn't have to hold back then. He latches onto the blood fills Akatani's mouth as the humanoid emits a gnarled gurgle from its damaged vocal cords. The bitten lashes out with a desperate swipe, backhanding Akatani across the chest. The humanoid has enough enhanced strength to knock the ghoul back. Akatani coughs as the wind gets blown from him, spit and blood flying out of his open mouth. The tentacles flailing after him stop his motion midair though, sparing him a second collision. One wraps around a nearby streetlight, using it as a pulley to launch the ghoul back at its opponent. The second swipe misses Akatani as he ducks under it, and with the humanoid's side exposed, he takes another chunk of its strange-colored flesh. It blubbers from its lips as it tries to yell, bringing its other arm down. Akatani catches it by the wrist, applying pressure. Whether the humanoid is just too strong or the ghoul is lacking the nourishment to match that strength, the bones don't bend or break, much to Akatani's surprise. In that moment of shock, he's delivered another blow to the abdomen. The ghoul bends backwards, shoulder scraping the ground, and then contorts to land on his side. Injured, his tentacles coil protectively around him like a shield. But in between those tails, a red iris peers out with an intent to get even. When he seethes through his teeth, it sounds like a hiss. Then, the ghoul is rushing the humanoid. A red limb snakes upwards and pierces his shoulder, while another sweeps out the being's legs. Then Akatani jumps with his arms and legs spread, a battle cry descending on an exposed brain. Akatani grabs onto the humanoid, fingers digging into his skin and legs locking around its waist. His teeth gnash together as they grind its brain matter, the squishy mush slopping in big bursts. Even with its neck torn out, the humanoid screeches at the top of its lungs. It staggers as it tries to remain alive, but ultimately gets devoured by its much more dominant enemy. The ghoul feasts on the unfamiliar flesh of his victim, indifferent to the bitter flavor of its green pigmentation. The fair share of meat reminds him of what it's like to actually eat. It's more satisfying than coffee or blood quenching his thirst. It's liberating. And Akatani can't get enough. He shovels handfuls of severed tendons into his gullet, swallowing them whole without bothering to chew. Saliva drips down from his chin as he inhales the scent of exposed liver. All that's capable of drawing the ghoul away from its first true meal in a long time is the promise of more. The screeching of a winged humanoid draws Akatani's eyes to the sky where he can see it flying overhead. This one is a pale yellow, its skin just as sickly as the previous creature Akatani put down. That doesn't stop him from launching himself at it to get a bite in though. In one pressurized push from the gathering of his tentacle appendages, he shoots through the air and crashes into it. The two monsters roll through the sky before crashing through a window and into a dining room. A few occupants scream as a vicious brawl breaks out. Akatani rips a chunk of flesh from the winged humanoid using his teeth before lifting it up into the ceiling. Furiously flapping its wings in a futile effort to escape, the creature shrieks in desperation. The ghoul shows no mercy, bringing the fellow beast back down into the floor, and then swinging it into a wall. The wild side-to-side ends with the two falling back out the window from which they came. Each brawl lands in the street, where more panicked bystanders flee from an intense wave of fire. Akatani reacts instinctively, not wanting to get caught up in the flames. His appendages pull him from the explosions, and he lands on the other side of the road. It's from there that he can see the chaos that fills the night. More genetically engineered beings roam the city of Hosu, wreaking havoc. Heroes that Akatani recognizes from Endeavor's agency fight to hold them back as best as they can. Akatani ascends the nearest building to get a better view of the battle, unsure of how he should interfere. The fog in his mind is only now starting to clear enough for him to think. It begins to register that the creatures he and the heroes are fighting likely belong to the League of Villains he and Himiko are hunting. There's no other villain organizations at the moment, and he knows personally from his own encounter with Stain that the hero killer works alone, so there's no other option. He watches as the creatures below attack indiscriminately. Even if it weren't his personalized mission to track and kill the League of Villains, they're a danger to the people that he can't ignore. Akatani leaps from his perch position, landing on a bleached white humanoid's back. Latched onto the creature like a spider or tick, he takes a bite out of its nape. It reacts violently, pivoting its body while roaring. Unlike the prior two that the ghoul had fought, this one has an extreme muscle density to match its newfound opponent. It grabs Akatani and tosses him off. The ghoul somersaults as he flies through the air before planting his kagyun into the ground to stop himself. Ready to go on his own rampage, the ghoul uses the assault of the humanoids as an opportunity to have a feeding frenzy. Akatani momentarily turns his attention away from the white one to grab an energy booster, a small one of the creatures, tearing out its heart to chew on. Then, the ghoul returns to its original target. The two clash, the white humanoid absorbing the impact and using the force of the blow to augment its muscles. The asphalt of the road cracks and crumbles as their weight shifts against one another. Then, an extreme air force is released from all the pent-up intake. Akatani is blown back just enough for the white humanoid to follow up with a surprising quirk, a tongue-web combination that snares the ghoul. Akatani struggles against the net, growling. The creature cackles. The ghoul eyes the tongue wrapping him before realizing that it's organic matter and severs it with a bite. Blood splatters across the street as the tongue is ripped apart by the ghoul's manic snapping. The white humanoid retracts what remains, making an awful sound as it does. Akatani follows the tongue back to its owner, charging in again. A hard dropkick smashes the creature's exposed brain, pink mush spraying every which way in a mixture of blood. Its eyes ooze from the same placement, rolling out of their sockets. Grinning at his fallen prey, Akatani dives in for his reward. The brain matter squishes between his teeth, and the muscle fibers ooze with blood. The satisfying meal leaves more to be desired. But the remaining humanoids are already being dealt with. The heroes have restrained the weaker ones, all that remains a duplicate of the white creature. It likely outclasses them, but not Endeavor himself. The number 2 ranked hero arrives in a glowing burst of fire, his hull flame completely cauterizing the remaining creature. It's destroyed beyond repair, flesh bubbling and blistering. Not even Akatani would want to eat the burned to crisp being. Endeavor stands over the defeated monster victoriously, one boot atop his corpse. He surveys the property damage and his sidekicks, eyes eventually landing on Akatani. When the two meet each other's gaze, an immediate understanding of what's about to happen reaches him. Endeavor doesn't bother evacuating the area or warning anyone, he just instantly launches an attack. Akatani's single exposed eye widens as he watches a tsunami of fire head his way. Though just a kid, and though Endeavor being quite a literal hothead, he supposes he can understand why the hero decided it was a good idea to attack him. For starters, he had been eating the corpse of one of the monsters terrorizing the city. Not to mention the leather ghoulish visage mask that he's wearing. It doesn't exactly give him a good look. But still, he can't believe the guy didn't even hesitate. Akatani springs from his spot, coiling his limbs around a street post. The metal becomes superheated from the massive wave of fire that Endeavor unleashes, making him move from it to the next just as quickly. But Endeavor doesn't let up, he hurls a line of fireballs at the scurrying boy too. The ghoul hastily scrambles alongside the wall of an apartment complex to dodge the miniature explosions, and takes another leap of faith to get away. But there's no fleeing from this fight. Endeavor is on him in an instant, flashing from one spot to the next to cut off his path. Akatani curses under his breath as the hero closes the distance. Unable to evade the incoming punch and becoming increasingly desperate, the ghoul does what any cornered animal would do. He bites. He catches the hero's burning fist in his mouth, sinking his teeth into the man's knuckles. Both Endeavor and Akatani feel an intense pain from the mixed contact. Endeavor reels from the bite with a shout, shocked to find his hand mangled. Akatani goes from seething through a mouthful of fire to sputtering and gagging, as his lips hiss. Having his mouth burned has the ghoul spitting out blood before he closes the zipper that exposes it. Having his knuckles chomped on makes Endeavor see red, his fist reclenching despite the pain it radiates in a burst of flame. Luckily for Akatani, and unluckily for the number 2 hero, it's right at this very moment that Himiko Toga finds her boyfriend. She strikes at Endeavor with her knife, catching him off guard just enough to cut his chest a bit. In that single fluid arriving motion, the blonde also grabs Akatani, and roughly pulls him back. The two put some distance between themselves and the hero, landing behind a crushed car. Himiko, Akatani exclaims in as much surprise as Endeavor is to have been cut by a girl in a school uniform. Himiko whirls on Akatani, exasperated and out of breath from having to get here. What kind of hot mess did you get yourself into? The boy watches Endeavor charge up another attack, grabbing onto Himiko and pulling her from their cover to behind another car, in order to avoid the incoming move. I don't really have an answer for that, he replies through gritted teeth as an explosion shakes the place that they once were. Endeavor isn't holding back. He's showing no mercy. He stomps towards them with heavy footfalls, boots burning into the pavement. You're not getting away. His tone is as serious as his hyper-focused expression. Himiko rebrandishes her knife, leaping up from behind the car in between her and the hero. Wanna bet? She's just as angry as the number 2 hero and charges in headfirst. Endeavor meets her halfway, flames igniting from the palms of his hands as he reaches for her. As the burning limbs close in, he growls under his breath, only if it's your life that's at stake. If it hadn't been evident enough before, Akatani now realizes that the so-called hero isn't looking to capture them. His girlfriend's life is at stake. No. He leaps over the car in his way to help, but he's too far behind. He fears he isn't going to make it in time. Fortunately enough, somebody else does. A red blur swoops in at the last second, swapping places with Himiko. Akatani recognizes the scarf before he does the jagged blade that's blocking Endeavor's attack. The hero killer, Stain, has come to their rescue. Endeavor pivots back from the sudden strike, and Stain sweeps his sword out to get one final lick in that manages to nick the hero's cheek. Akatani lands beside the hero killer, catching the tail end of his sentence. Been looking forward to hunting you most of all, Endeavor. Stain pauses when he notices the ghoul's arrival, and diverts his attention just enough to acknowledge the presence. You again. There are many things Akatani wants to say and do in that moment, many of them conflicting with the other. However, the main thing that's on his mind is his girlfriend's safety. So what he chooses to do is bow, thank you for saving her. Stain grunts, sparing a quick glance at the blonde that he rescued. Get her out of here. This fight is mine now. And then he turns his attention back to the flaming hero he's about to face in combat. You must be the hero killer. Endeavor is just as intently focused on his opponent. The fire encompassing his body increases in output in a threatening display of power. Your reign of murder ends here. Stain matches the energy with his own, bloodlust radiating from the end of his blade when he points it directly at Endeavor. His tone holds more animosity and hatred than Akatani could manage as he boldly replies, just try it, you fake. Already predicting Endeavor's next move, Akatani dives for his girlfriend to shield her from the incoming blast. Himiko. He calls out to her as his tentacles reach to make a shield. The raging inferno consumes the area around them, and they're engulfed in hell's flames. The storefront window is as faded as the quality on the television screen behind it, but the dying hues of the image are still identifiable. The subtitles that have been put on to substitute for the lack of speakers are still very much readable. The kanji text says the same thing that's being shown. Last night was a shit show. Footage plays of the hell that was raised, a combination of Endeavor's flames and fire from destruction of property, blending with the window's sun glare. The top story is a UA student's death at the hands of supposedly Stain. The name of the deceased is Tenya Iida, a member of the Ingenium family. Endeavor is being proclaimed a hero for catching the killer and stopping the humanoid creatures called Nomu that aided him. Apparently, Stain had been working with the ones responsible for the cataclysm, which just so happens to be the League of Villains. Akatani isn't sure what to make of the information dumped onto him after the matter, especially since he had been a part of it himself. Another big part of the story being woven by the news and media is the return of the Tokyo Ghoul, also cited during the incident. Akatani feels his phone vibrating in his pocket, tearing his attention away from the television momentarily. He only bothers to check it because it could be Himiko trying to call him. Who he's expecting to see attempting to contact him instead is exactly who it turns out to be though. Eraserhead and his detective friend have left Akatani nearly 100 text messages, and just as many missed calls with half of those calls, resulting in voicemail messages. He can't blame them after the news report on the Hosu crisis. He had just wished to have prolonged this inevitability when running away. The TV displays him with his quirk on full display, protecting Himiko from the brawl between Stain and Endeavor. The two of them had used the fight as a diversion for their escape, but didn't get away unscathed. Plenty of flames had licked their arms and legs as they fled. They had also been caught on camera, for the whole world to see. Even with his mask, Akatani had been exposed. Aizawa and Tsukauchi would no doubt identify him easily. Considering their non-stop effort to get into touch with him, they likely already have. Oi, Akatani. The familiar high-pitched voice of his girlfriend alerts Akatani to her return. Before turning to face her, he crushes his cell phone with the aid of his quirk strength enhancement. He doesn't know if the police and heroes would be able to track him somehow had he not broken it, but he doesn't want to take the chance of there being a possibility. Plus, he doesn't need the constant reminder of his betrayal towards them. With Himiko back, he doesn't have to worry about keeping the device intact for her to call him either. Himiko isn't alone. Walking alongside her is a man covered in burns despite not having been present that night. Akatani immediately recognizes him as Dabi. He's wearing a long jacket despite the warm weather, hands shoved into his pockets. You've gone and made yourself quite the celebrity. Dobby jokes without a hint of amusement in his tone about the current situation. He gestures with a small nod while asking, afraid of the paparazzi. Akatani's face scrunches up in confusion over the question, before realizing it's rhetorical, and why it's being jokingly asked. He tugs at the white medical mask that he's wearing, suddenly remade aware of it covering his mouth. While it does help to conceal his identity, that wasn't the reason he had chosen to wear it. When the bands behind his ears are pulled off, he shows Dobby the burn marks around his mouth. Your dad's a dick, dude. Akatani says through scorched lips. Dobby's normally drooped eyelids lift fully, and his body stands straight, the initial shock of Akatani's words getting the better of him. He tries shaking it off by returning to his usually bored expression, my dad. Though he's missing the slouched demeanor that comes with actual relaxation, he's not. Not wanting to bother with the act, Akatani cuts Dobby off with a deadpan look that says more than any words could. Dobby's mouth stays open, but none of the lies or excuses he was going to use come out of it. Instead, he sighs heavily and asks, how did you know? Akatani simply holds the deadpan look. If it weren't for the burns, he's sure that Dobby would be blushing in embarrassment. The bashful expression alone is enough for them to communicate that the familial ties were obvious. Not to mention the way he acted strangely in his brother's company. Himiko glances between the two, a delighted grin on her face. Eventually, she can't hold it in anymore and lets out a fit of giggles. Akatani almost joins her, but settles for a small smile instead. Dobby groans, not agreeing that having his identity outed is as funny as they think it is. Dobby brings a hand to his forehead, just short of a facepalm as it slides down. Not a single word. He spreads his fingers to peer out at the two teens, so they can see how serious he is, to anyone. But Himiko doesn't meet his eyes, still laughing. Dobby's got daddy issues. She continues to casually tease him. Until his tone turns hard to iterate, I'm serious. His hand drops away from his face so he can shoot her a look in order to make her stop. Akatani steps forward, even though he's sure Dobby wouldn't actually do anything to harm her, he can't help but be a bit protective. We'll keep it to ourselves. His own tone is just as hardened and defined. But it softens when he actually takes a moment and looks between his girlfriend and Dobby. We've all got secrets about our past that we want to hide. Himiko and I understand the need for privacy. He meets Dobby's eyes while tacking on at the end, at least a little. Dobby holds his gaze with Akatani, but ultimately breaks it first, changing the subject. His eyes return to making contact as he asks, you and Stain were tight. Akatani blinks in surprise, cocking his head in equal confusion. Huh? What makes you think that? It's Dobby's turn to deadpan. He waves a lazy hand in the general direction of the television, it's all over the news. Himiko playfully pouts, crossing her arms under her bust and stamping her feet. She recalls Stain saving her and asks her own question about him, how come you never introduced me to him? I'm your girlfriend, aren't I? It was fairly recent, Himiko. Akatani stammers as he tries to pacify her with an explanation first. Once he gets the blonde to settle down, he returns his attention to Dobby. He respected me. That explanation is a little harder for him to manage, I think. As uncertain as he is of his own relationship to Stain, he also has to wonder why Dobby bothers to care. Why do you ask? Dobby looks away, trying to act casual and bored as always, but his words hold a weight to them that Akatani helps carry with every word that he listens to. When you first came to me looking for that legion or whatever, I thought nothing of it. But they're saying Stain was a part of them. And Stain's philosophy ain't half bad. I'm thinking you and I can get along. Dobby's shoe scrapes the ground as he idly kicks the sidewalk's curb with a gentle swing. Akatani raises his head after hearing Dobby's words. Are you saying? He starts to wonder if the correlation between Stain and the League of Villains also corresponds with Dobby. I know guy. Calls himself Jiren. He's got connections. Dobby confirms those thoughts when he meets Akatani's eyeline. I think he can get us in touch with that club you're looking for. Himiko bounces in place, emitting Akatani's inner joy physically for him. More meat for you and more blood for me. Though her delighted cheer does earn a side-eyed glance from Dobby. It's just like you wanted, right? She grins happily for him as she eagerly awaits his affirmation. Though, it's rather hard for him to have a smile at the moment. Yeah. So he puts his mask back on to hide the scars again. It's exactly what I wanted. Despite the underground hero's deliberately light step, the first floorboard of the house buckles under his footfall. Instead of creaking, the loose wood groans in protest against the weight of his boot. The ground threatens to break like the furniture that rests atop it. Behind the slits in his yellow goggles, Eraserhead's eyes narrow into a focused squint. Broken bookshelves, their contents spilled out. A destroyed couch and equally splintered chairs. He's not sure yet whether the wake of destruction is a sign of struggle or another type of rampage, but it's concerning to him either way. Behind the inspective hero, Detective Tsukauchi's rectangular eyes are set in an equal state of strabismus. He too analyzes the damage with a critical gaze, drawing his own conclusions. Eraserhead looks back at him, the two communicating with a quick glance after assessing the environment. Tsukauchi nods before brandishing his badge from the pocket of his overcoat. Akatani. It's Detective Namasa Tsukauchi. I'm coming in. Eraserhead moves aside so that the detective can venture beyond him by a few steps. Each footfall carries through the floorboards just like the hero's first. Let me know you're here if you can hear me. Tsukauchi cautiously turns the corner at the end of the hall to check another room before calling out again, Akatani. When the detective receives no answer, the underground hero makes an attempt. Kid. His usually gruff voice holds a gentle tone that he ordinarily wouldn't use. It's Aizawa. I'm here too. Tsukauchi checks over his shoulder, assessing his partner as much as the damage to the atmosphere. When Aizawa meets the gaze, Tsukauchi looks away. I don't think he's here. The detective sighs while shoving the underground hero hums in agreement, not yet having lowered his guard. The door showed signs of forced entry. His voice is lowered to be just short of a whisper in case they aren't alone. Rationalizing the situation and the possibilities, he deems it possible that somebody could have kidnapped or blackmailed Akatani. Tsukauchi isn't quite as convinced, but nods along anyways. Aizawa is renowned for conspiracy theories, and despite some of those notions being proven true, that's his reason for his reluctance. Not to mention the recent news footage showing Akatani back in action as the Tokyo Ghoul. Tsukauchi has to imagine he isn't the only one with resurfacing memories of the crime scenes Akatani had left behind in the beginning. The detective searches a bathroom, finding discarded box dye. Each container is for black coloring. Akatani had no doubt been changing his hair hue to hide his identity. Tsukauchi notes the detail before checking the shower sink. He has half a mind to check the pantries and the fridge, but pauses in the hallway when he finds Aizawa back by the front entrance. The underground hero is surveying the door's damage, intent on proving whatever thought he has about its hinges being forcibly removed as valid. It was kicked in. Aizawa senses Tsukauchi's eyes on him and addresses the detective without bothering to return the look. The hero gestures towards a marking that indicates he's right, dead in the center. A shoe imprint the same size as the one from the blood bank. Tsukauchi balks at first, but quickly recovers when he sees the same evidence that Aizawa does. He mulls over the possibility and the assumptions that can be made from that piece of information, before remembering what Aizawa had theorized about Akatani's partner that night, the girlfriend. Aizawa has his own memory recollection of recent incidents, such as his phone call with the boy, and his introduction to the girl not too long ago. Yes, the girlfriend. He tries to keep any judgment out of his tone but fails. Picking up on the way Aizawa sounds, Tsukauchi raises a brow. You think she's a bad influence? He wonders. The underground hero looks between the door that was busted down and the detective before answering, I don't know yet. He then pushes past Tsukauchi to inspect the other damages. She couldn't have been the one to have caused all this. Tsukauchi rests his thumb against his bottom lip, chewing its nail as he contemplates things too. Even if she's a petite girl, it isn't impossible for her to have a quirk that grants strength of such capacity. For a moment, the thought of his dear friend Toshinori comes to mind, and how he as a hero flexes into a muscle form, the unassuming average form he has when not saving the day as All Might doesn't give the slightest hint of power that he's capable of. How can you be so sure? The detective asks. Aizawa pulls his goggles down so that they hang around his neck, along with the capture cloth he wears like a scarf. With his eyes uncovered, he meets Tsukauchi's gaze. I'm assuming she's one and the same girl that he saved from Endeavor's flames during the Hosu news report. If she were capable of such destruction here, I doubt she would have required rescue. He sounds more contemplative than certain of his words. However, before Tsukauchi can point that out and poke holes in the hero's hypothesis, Aizawa continues. And if Akatani was capable of killing the entire Yakuza, then I doubt a single individual would give him any trouble. Or, without a larger amount of property damage, at least. The two find themselves glancing back at the door. There's no real way of knowing what happened, but we shouldn't be making assumptions either. Tsukauchi waves for Aizawa to follow him. There's more variables to be considered here anyways. The underground hero is led into the bathroom where the detective picks up an empty hair dye container to hand over for inspection. It could simply be that Akatani decided to run away with his girlfriend. Typical teenage romance. And last night was just them being at the wrong place at the wrong time. Aizawa's expression doesn't appear as hopeful as he sounds. He doesn't believe his own words, and neither does Tsukauchi when he thinks about it for more than a second. He did sound strange on the phone when he was saying goodbye to Eri. As though it would be his last. Aizawa weighs the dye box in his hand, like it's heavier than it actually is, as he mulls over his last conversation with Akatani. Tsukauchi hesitates to say this next part, uncertain of how Aizawa will react, but works up enough courage to do so anyways. I know you promised not to pry into his past. But I think we're way past promises at this point. Aizawa hears Tsukauchi, but doesn't react. He just keeps staring at the dye box in his hand. Akatani had purposely altered his appearance. The boy has a reason for lying about his name. Under ordinary circumstances, it wouldn't be Aizawa's or anyone else's place to delve into why without his consent. Aizawa had grown close to the kid and his illegitimate sister. Aizawa doesn't want to betray their trust by compromising the relationship they've established. And yet, you're right. He must also be rational about the investigation. If we're going to find him, then we need to know who it is that we're actually looking for. He discards the die box and hardens his resolve. Tsukauchi does his best to look encouraging as he agrees, and that'll tell us where to look. Then he takes out his cell phone to text Hamikawa orders. I'll see what I can uncover at the precinct using what we already know about him, but I'm thinking we shouldn't limit ourselves. Aizawa takes less than a second to decipher the unspoken request from the detective, and his answer is a solid no. Tsukauchi looks up from his phone mid-typing with an appalled expression, but Aizawa stays firm, shaking his head. It's never a good idea to get him involved when it comes to children. Whoever allowed that mammal to teach it a skull is just as sick and delusional as he is. He knows exactly who it is that the detective wants to bring in on the investigation, and he downright refuses to make things all the more chaotic by agreeing. Tsukauchi tries not to look or sound too amused by how resolute the underground hero is being. I feel like talking like that could cost you your job. He's not taking Aizawa's words that seriously. Seeing that's the case, Aizawa turns almost somber. He rarely wears his emotions on his sleeve, but he's rather adamant when it comes to Akatani. I just don't want him getting any ideas. This one is a delicate matter. He treats the boy with fragility as much as he does the girl he's adopted. Tsukauchi can't help but sympathize with the man and places a consoling hand on his shoulder to say as gently as possible, it could be more fragile than you already think it is. When Aizawa looks the detective in the eye, he sees the sincerity and understands the importance without needing the added, that's why we need to know. He tries to resist, but finally gives in. Aizawa brushes Tsukauchi's hand off his shoulder, fine, and heads for the exit. I'll talk to Nezu. Tsukauchi watches Aizawa's receding back, but doesn't bother chasing after it. After all, he has to treat the scene properly and get a forensics team over. The detective turns around to get one last good look at the mess that's been made. He doesn't want to regret giving the boy a chance, but he's not so sure he's dealing with a basic boy. All the blood that's been spilled and all the lies that have been told. Guess who's Akatani Mikumo? Was he always just a Tokyo ghoul in disguise? When the trio of lead candidates first entered the bar, their initial impression of the barren brick walls is that the significantly spacious hideaway is just short of being a less than decorative basement dwelling. Muted colors of bottles on the shelves behind the bar counter match the unadorned lazy spin of the ceiling fan. The place itself seems just as disinteresting as its disinterested patrons. A man with faded blue hair sits with his back to Akatani, Dabi, and Himiko. The living purple mist behind the counter faces the group instead, the only one well dressed for the occasion. Not even Jiren, the intermediary middleman, bothers with a classy fashion sense. He opts to wear nothing more chic than a fluffy scarf and circular glasses. I've got some kids here saying they're interested in your group. I assure you, these ones are more capable than the last bunch. Not like the other recruits. He twists a toothpick in his mouth with his tongue as he speaks, however, the slight slurring of words is still decipherable. Akatani and the others are expecting who they assume is the bartender to speak in response, but it's the blue-haired man that Jiren happened to be actually addressing. And who are they? He turns his head just enough for the trio to get a glimpse of his chapped lips grinding out his questions. Jiren grins, all teeth minus one in the middle on full display. He gestures towards the bunch with a mild flourish, as though he's presenting them. I'll let them speak for themselves. His eyes glint the same as his tinted glasses when he glances towards the group that he's brought. Himiko, the most enthusiastic of the trio, is the first to jump at the opportunity of an introduction. You're friends with Mr. Staney, right? We've been looking for you. She practically vibrates in place as her face tinges red in excitement. The blue-haired man does bother to spare a glance over his shoulder, but it's a rather dismissive look. He has red eyes crusted around the edges that flick over to Dabi instead. You don't look like very much of a league. You look rather gross, actually. Dabi returns the critical gaze with one of his own squinted glares. Hearing that must strike a nerve, because the man returns to his former state, no longer considering them worthy of a second glance. Kurogiri. Warp them away. He lazily waves a hand as though he's shooing away a fly. Akatani mentally notes the bartender's name and potential teleportation quirk before listening to the rest, a brat, a guy with no manners, and a silent creep. I don't like any of them. Himiko's earlier excitement diminishes a little, an expression of disappointment overcoming her as she cocks her head to the side. Huh. The one named Kurogiri gives the girl somewhat of an apologetic glance before denying the blue-haired man's request. Come now, they've traveled all this way just to meet you. You may as well humor them with a chat. Kurogiri's gaze then shifts to Jiren. What's more, if they're being introduced by our influential broker friend here, we can be sure that they're at least competent fighters. Jiren shrugs, not elaborating on whether they are or aren't. Akatani doesn't know how acquainted Himiko and Dabi are with him for him to actually know. Plus the broker had only met him personally very recently to definitely not know, but it's a response he can get behind during a sensitive negotiation. Either way, I'll take my finder's fee now. Jiren holds out his hand with the expectation of receiving payment. The Kurogiri isn't quite as accommodating a second time. He raises up his own hand, introductions first, denying the request momentarily. Jiren begrudgingly retracts his hand and nods for the trio to share their names. I'm Himiko Toga. Akatani's girlfriend does the liberty of starting them off, and this is Akatani. I go by Dabi right now. Dabi does his own introduction. Himiko and Akatani, knowing his real name, share a look with one another, but don't say anything out loud. The blue-haired man turns around, now giving them all his undivided attention. No good. I want to know your real name. But he singles out Dabi with a pointed finger specifically. Before things can escalate, Akatani decides that it's finally time that he says something. He takes a step forward to direct everyone's attention to him before announcing, I'm the Tokyo Ghoul. Everyone aside from Himiko shares an expression that crosses both shock and awe. But Akatani isn't finished. He looks around the small bar, still only counting 2 people present. And you're the League of Villains. Is this really all of you? It's his turn to be unimpressed by what he sees. The blue-haired man seems skeptical, his critical gaze from earlier returning full swing. But he still humors Akatani. Yes, I'm the leader. Now knowing that he's finally found the last of his targets and that they're of small numbers, with the leader right in front of him, he's already calculating how to kill them. The leader taps a finger on the bar counter as he demands from Akatani, prove you are who you say you are. His sclera darkening, the ghoul obliges. A predatory instinct kicks in, backburning to unleash his equivalent of claws. He remembers Aizawa's bandages, Yuri's guardian and his previously poor condition within the Uemepe. Akatani plans to return the favor. The ghoul growls as he prepares to pounce. Oh, I intend to. But as forthwith as his killing intent had expanded, it instantaneously evaporates. An equal force opposes his own, casting over him like the shadow of a bigger beast. Akatani's burning blood runs cold when he hears an amused chuckle coming from behind the bar counter. His eyes are drawn to the source of intimidation, spotting a miniature television that says only audio in kanji as red as his shrunken pupils. No need. The disembodied voice is deceptively soothing. Hidden in the tone is that same dominant power Akatani had sensed. It's a deep and demanding boom. I would like a private audience with our most prestigious guest, if you mind. The League of Villains leader doesn't seem so much like the actual leader anymore when he inquisitively stares at the small TV monitor. Sensei. The owner of the voice remains in charge, making it clear that was an order and not a request. Take time to get acquainted with his friends, Tomura. You may learn a thing or two about companionship and allegiance. They sound as though they're talking down to a child. The power dynamic and who reigns in superiority is more evident than ever. It'd be funny if it weren't so terrifying. Akatani looks back at Himiko and Dabi, expecting the true leader to reveal themselves. But he's suddenly struck by a wave of nausea, throwing him off balance. He can feel something climbing up his throat. He feels sick. It's reminiscent of when he vomits the unprocessed attempts at eating anything other than flesh. Wait, but what comes out of his mouth this time instead is a black goo as flexible and tangible as his kagyan. It wraps around his body, covering his face and concealing his vision. And then, suddenly, the darkness transports him to a room just as pitch black. What? He fights the gag reflex of having something forcibly breach the walls of his throat, but fails miserably. Momentarily, he wonders if that was Kurogiri's warping quirk. However, that thought is immediately overtaken by panicked voices when the presence he had felt earlier increases tenfold. His instincts scream at him. His mind yells just as vocally. But his body becomes paralyzed. He's trapped in a state of petrification, as the crushing pressure of sheer power makes itself known to him. The aura makes Akatani collapse to his knees, his whole body bending over as he fights back the urge to puke for real this time. He's being forced to bow to the mightier being. The submissive state is one that he knows well. He's seen his own prey do the same sometimes. To be on the receiving end for once, he can't help but shed tears. He can hear the beeping of a heartbeat monitor. He's not sure if that's real or if it's a part of what he's currently imagining. The extreme emanation forces him to experience hallucinations of his own death as well. Torn and dismembered like he's left some of his own victims. Shredded and violated. Drowning in his own blood. Suffocating as he's choked by the tremendous pressure. Stabbed through his pounding heart, pierced and cut wide open. He feels as though he's falling from a great height. Then he lands in hell where he burns alive. Each assaulting image is a beating that makes his entire body tremble. The voice returns, making Akatani shudder. He's pretty sure that voice belongs to the devil. This is the first time you felt inferior to another out of a naturally born instinct, isn't it? The tone is genuinely inquisitive rather than taunting. That only intensifies the effect of the feeling he's unable to endure. He feels like an ant that's being studied, played with, by a giant that could squash it at any moment it loses interest. But Akatani manages a meek nod. His mind is too distraught to think of a verbal response, though he'd doubtfully be capable of formulating any coherent speech if he were thinking clearly. Akatani reconnoisses at the close proximity of the voice. You have no conception of how far up the food chain goes, boy. It sounds so close and yet so distant at the same time. The most lethal of predators are good at concealing their bloodlust. You should take that advice into practice. I could easily sense your hostile intent towards Tomura. Akatani recognizes the tone is the same that had been used with the so-called Tomura. He's being talked down to, perceived as an inferior child. In the presence of this being, he knows that to be true. Have you nothing to say for yourself, boy? Akatani's throat is too dry to say anything. Until, the same force that commands him to be docile demands that he speak. He's a threat. Akatani's voice trembles more than his body as he admits to the desire of wanting Tomura dead. He knows he can be smited easily should the owner of the voice so deem it, and he's just given them a valid reason. To the child you've grown an attachment with. The true leader of the League of Villains shocks Akatani even more. He's shaking to his core that such an unstoppable force knows about his relationship to Eri, as the reason for their being at odds. Don't be so surprised. I'm capable of reading your thoughts like an open book. Through all the terror and desperation, it's easy to find the root of those emotions. Akatani struggles to breathe as he takes in that information. His mind is capable of being invaded, his thoughts read, and quite possibly corrupted. He theorizes that the feeling he's perceiving from the mind reader's presence comes from that same source of power. A part of him knows that a good margin is genuinely just the person's unmitigated existence. Unfortunately, I cannot allow you to end Tomura's life. He is of importance to me. He's reminded of that aura when it washes over him like a wave in an ever-endless bottomless sea. However, I see a potential in you that would be a shame to waste. You could prove useful to Tomura. Before he can sink to the bottom and drown, crushed by the pressure, he feels himself pulled back to the surface. Akatani gasps for air as he greedily tries to inhale it all for himself. The force that had been weighing down on him has been significantly lifted, but his body still falls to the floor. He's beyond exhausted. Who are you? He tries to get a good look at who caused him such grief. In the thick darkness, he can make out what looks like the equivalent of a throne. Several wires and cables are connected to it, an array of monitors much like the one from the bar also attached. And seated at its center, is a well-dressed man. I have many names. Most prominently, All for One, an account for my abundance of quirks and the unique ability to take more from others. The promise of power from that introduction alone has Akatani quivering all over again. But when he sees the face belonging to that power, he's beyond horrified. But you will call me Sensei. The scarred flesh where eyes should be somehow stares into Akatani's soul more than actual eyes would be able to. Why you plan to take my quirk from me? It suddenly makes sense to him how someone could be so limitlessly indomitable. Oh? What's this? The kindling of hope that I hear. All for One tilts his head to the side as he outwardly notes Akatani's tone. How interesting. Akatani imagines a life without his quirk. If it weren't for his uncontrollable impulses and his extreme urges, he would have been able to lead a regular life. His mother would still be alive. Maybe, just maybe, he would have been able to still get into UA with Koch-chan. I can only view your thoughts so much. Would you be opposed to meeting a quirk specialist colleague of mine? All for One's intrigue sends shivers down Akatani's spine, and he begins to regret the desire to bear it of his quirk. He can't imagine someone so evil increasing their strength with his quirk too. What do you want from me? Akatani struggles to push himself upwards. It takes all he has, but he somehow manages to push off with his hands and just stay on his knees. All for One watches the boy with sick pleasure, smiling softly as he enjoys the entertaining display. He speaks at a low decibel, almost assuredly, not your quirk. Though powerful, it wouldn't pale in comparison to my arsenal. But conveys anything but a form of assurance. I'm much more interested in your mind. Especially when he extends a hand. Akatani instinctively shies away from the near contact, all sorts of alarms and warnings going off in his head. Especially when he sees something crawling beneath the surface of the man's sleeve. The length and size of All for One's fingers, a red-headed centipede twists itself around his hand and reaches towards Akatani. Acting on a survival reflex, his senses telling him it's no ordinary insect, the boy scurries back faster than the actual bug crawls. Akatani pants heavily, his unnatural pupils focused on the centipede that reaches just short of his face. Its preformal spines twiddle in an attempt at making contact. If All for One is displeased, he doesn't show it. If anything, he finds the reaction humorous, letting out a low chuckle. He pulls his arm away, the centipede retreating back under his sleeve. We'll both have to test our patience then. He lifts the same hand he had used to prop his chin against his knuckles, another time. Akatani swallows in between heavy breaths, unable to express anything but relief that he hadn't been subjected to whatever All for One literally had up his sleeve. Though he also can't help but be unsettled by the unspoken promise of another time. He shakily lifts his head, daring to look at the man responsible for such an impending feeling of absolute damnation. The business attire is almost as casual as his sitting position, the lack of a tie, and the few loose buttons at the top are nonchalant. Yet, the face that wears it all is just like the aura he emits. A horrifically sinister contortion of what a person's worst self can be, personified as a form of evil. Even without sockets, Akatani can feel All for One's eyes on him. He's not sure how the man can see, but he knows that he must. He can't help but shake the feeling of being studied like he's bacteria under a microscope. You will return to Tomura and agree to work with him. You will not harm him if you don't want the same to be done to the girls you're so fond of. Akatani feels small in comparison to the potential menace of this particular predator. He has no choice but to accept the true monster's conditions, now knowing his role in the criminal climate is drastically changed. The threat to Eri and Himiko is one that can be delivered on, and he'd be unable to do anything about it. He's been caged again, this time by something far worse than the heroes. He remembers what All for One wished to be addressed as in answers, "Why yes, sensei." All for One's smile becomes even more wicked, if that's even possible. The Tokyo Ghoul is now his pet. The cool breeze brushing through his hair is the only thing that reminds him of his physical presence. The whir from the ceiling fan is the only thing that reminds him of his ability to still hear properly. His senses are in such a state of disarray that they each lock onto the spin above him, his eyes dizzying with his mind. He hadn't experienced such a state since the time he killed and devoured his mother. He feels lost in a strange place that he doesn't belong. Back then, it had been the wilderness as a child without his mom's embrace. Now, it's an equally hostile environment without the limbs of his Kagyun to shield him. Absent-mindedly, Akatani digs a fingernail into the bar counter in front of him. Like a claw, he grinds the wood so that it chips and splinters. The surface already has its fair share of scratches anyways that he doesn't particularly feel bad about adding more. The distraction is somehow comforting that he wouldn't want to stop even if he did. Each time he scrapes away a piece of the counter, he feels like he's carving out his problems. The shavings start to collect to the point of formulating a pile, so he brushes them off and they fall to the floor. Then, something gets slid towards him. He pauses his newfound wood carving hobby to glance up at it. A small rectangular package rests on the unscathed part of the bar counter, wrapped in what appears to be butcher paper. Akatani raises his head a little more to see who placed it there. The purple wisp of smoke dressed in elegant clothing stares back at the boy. Akatani asks the smoky man, "What's this?" He remembers the villain's name is Kurogiri. Kurogiri doesn't divert his attention, stoic and stiff as ever while addressing Akatani. "You're looking rather pale. Consider it a complimentary meal." Though one of his hands does gesture in reference to the miniature package. Akatani grits his teeth together, blaming his discoloration on his newly appointed sensei. Just thinking of the devil's personification makes him shudder and sweat. When his mind returns to the present and no longer lingers on that dark room which may as well have been hell, he sees Kurogiri waiting patiently. Akatani clears his throat and starts to deny the food offering. "I don't have any money. It's on the house." But gets interrupted as politely as possible. Even Kurogiri's tone sounds sympathetically considerate. Akatani eyes the bartender warily, not buying into the act. He's not forgetting the man is a villain that works under the employ of someone far worse. Besides, he has a valid reason for denying the food. "My diet isn't like others." He tries pushing the packaged meal away. But Kurogiri blocks his attempt by resting his own hand on the parcel too. "We at the League of Villains took that into account." He pushes back as gently as possible. Akatani allows the bartender to slide it more into his space out of curiosity. When the package is in front of him, Akatani unwraps the thin butcher paper that's been quadruply layered. He catches a whiff of a familiar scent before his eyes recognize the meat inside as human flesh. Muscle fibers and tendons have been sliced like cold cuts for his convenience. Akatani can't suppress the saliva that starts to fill up in his mouth, so he mumbles a "thanks" and digs in. Kurogiri momentarily watches the boy eat before asking, "Would you care for a cup of coffee as well?" Akatani pauses as he considers the question. He's in a bar, but he's underage. Aside from water, he supposes there isn't much else the bartender would offer. Though it does creep him out to think his new sensei could already know all there is to know about him. He eventually decides to ignore his paranoia and gives in with a nod. Kurogiri returns the gesture with a single nod of his own before brewing a cup. He fusses behind the counter a little bit before grabbing a glass container full of brown squares and asking, "Sugar?" Akatani starts to deny the offer with an explanation, "My taste palette. These aren't ordinary sugar cubes," but gets cut off. Akatani indicates Kurogiri to continue with a curious tilt of his head. "Infused brain matter. Designed specifically for you." The explanation has Akatani recalling the humanoid creatures called Nomu that he had fought in Hosu. The Nomu had their brains exposed, which means the validity of that statement in terms of what organs aren't hard to come by must be true. Akatani eyes the small brown blocks with a sneaking suspicion. His nose tells him that they aren't drugged or poisoned, so he trusts in his senses. "Sure. I'll try it." He figures there's nothing to lose if it'll help quench his appetite. Judging by the upturn of the bartender's yellow slants for eyes, Akatani blows on the steaming drink before taking a sip. To his surprise, it tastes better than any other coffee he's had prior. It also helps to sober him to his surroundings and clear the fog in his mind. Glancing around the bar, he questions the first thing that he failed to notice until now: where's Himiko and Dabi? Kurogiri grabs a rag and busies himself with cleaning a shot glass as he answers, with Tomura. Like you, they were re-evaluated and welcomed into the fold. Remembering Tomura's hostility when first meeting his friends, that explanation doesn't do much to allay Akatani's concerns about their absence. But where? He stresses the emphasis of his inquiry to get a better answer. Taking note of Akatani's worries, Kurogiri pauses his cleaning to assure the boy they're safe. We have no intention of harming our own allies. And then elaborates on their whereabouts per request. You have a residence here as well. They're being shown their rooms. At that, Akatani raises his eyebrows in a combination of confusion and interest. Food and bed. Is this a hotel or bar? He tries to play it off as a joke, but can't help but imagine what he and Himiko would have done otherwise. Part of him wonders if Dabi would have let them stay with him, if he even has a place of his own. The money he saved from working at Antiku wouldn't have got them further than a few weeks. Are you not grateful? Kurogiri resumes wiping down glasses, now that the mood has shifted to something more lighthearted. Though, that doesn't last very long. Akatani doesn't want to owe a debt to the League. He doesn't want to be shown hospitality by villains. He may be deterred by Sensei momentarily, but he refuses to forget his goal. Kurogiri and Tomura are still his targets. He'll kill them. Not today. Nor tomorrow. But eventually. So he answers Kurogiri with a curt, no. I'm not. Meanwhile, Akatani's yesterday catches up with him. There's no outrunning his past when a certain rat is running the maze. After class hours, Aizawa enters Nezu's office for a discussion that he'd been dreading the entire teaching day. He's filled with even more despair when he finds Detective Tsukauchi also there with one of his students. Bakugo. It's after school hours. Shouldn't you be at home? Aizawa fixes his focus on the spiky-haired blonde first. Though Nezu is quick to confirm the teacher's suspicion of the boy's presence, actually Aizawa, Mr. Bakugo is here per my request. Much to his dismay. Aizawa sighs before also taking a seat, getting settled in for the long haul of what he's sure ought to be a headache-inducing conversation. And why is one of my students present for this? You'll never guess the coincidence. Tsukauchi glances over at the underground hero before nodding towards Nezu. The principal returns the gesture before turning the computer screen on his desk to face the other way. On the monitor is a green-haired boy with a face full of freckles. Meet Izuku Midoriya. Bakugo frowns. Tsukauchi stares at Aizawa from the corner of his eye. Aizawa finds the face familiar, but can't quite place it until Nezu reveals the identity for him, or as you may have come to know him. Akatani Mikumo. Aizawa's eyes broaden when he places the features. The outdated picture shows an extreme evolution occurred, but the kid is undeniably one and the same. What's Bakugo got to do with him? Aizawa redirects his attention as he tries to think of a correlation. Bakugo meets his teacher's gaze as he explains, I grew up with the nerd. I knew him before he. The pause has Aizawa raise a brow. Before he ran away. Bakugo averts his eyes. The avoidance of eye contact has Aizawa asking, ran away. Bakugo nods. When he realizes his teacher is waiting on a verbal answer, he elaborates, after his mom died, he just vanished. His mother. Aizawa's breath hitches as he starts to learn about Akatani Izuku Midoriya's past. Shit got really fucked. His quirk manifested and he bit me. Then he stopped coming to school. Then his mom, she was. The details of Bakugo's recollection start to come fast, but end on a more somber note, he fucking ate Auntie Inko. It suddenly makes sense to Aizawa why the boy was so intent on covering up his past. The disdain for his own quirk and how he had to cope with its effects. He's only a child and he had reformatted his whole identity to accommodate for the danger he saw in himself. All Aizawa can manage to say instead of a swear word is, Christ. Detective Tsukauchi and I had similar reactions, but I'm afraid you're a little late to receiving that information for us to dwell too long on it. Nezu unsympathetically brushes it aside in order to move on with his other findings. But Aizawa is still processing the travesty for him to be as eager. The kid ate his own mother. Let's just calm down. Please, Aizawa, have a seat. Tsukauchi rests a hand on the underground hero's shoulder to keep him from standing up. Nezu also makes an attempt to de-escalate the situation. Would you like a cup of tea? Though all the principal's suggestion does is earn another glare from Aizawa. No. I would not. Suit yourself. Nezu easily shrugs it off. He continues with his casual demeanor to type into the system and pull up a new file. Well, Mr. Midoriya's mother is no longer with us. We shouldn't neglect the boy's father. Auntie Inko always said the deadbeat bastard worked overseas. Bakugo provides his relatively helpful input about the matter from the sidelines. And Tsukauchi bounces off of it to also explain, which is why it'll be difficult to get a hold of him for questioning. Aizawa doesn't like the sounds of that, but waits to hear more before asking anything. The computer screen switches to a new photo ID, this one a splitting image of Izuku, if he were aged up by 20 to 30 years. Hisashi Midoriya. Nothing too abnormal about his record. Although, I do find the lack of concern for his wife or son rather odd. He never left America for her funeral, nor did he bother to search for young Midoriya. Nezu provides a rundown of the information he's gathered on the man. But Aizawa doesn't find any of it the least bit helpful. That doesn't mean he'd have anything to offer if we could speak with him. That just means he's an asshole. My thoughts exactly. Nezu beams with a smile like the lack of a let is a good thing. Tsukauchi draws everyone's attention to him when he voices that problem out loud. Despite learning more about the kid, we're not left with many leads. Though not without a small caveat towards Aizawa, Nezu and I were hoping you might be able to get something out of this. The underground hero recoils at the implication. He figured the rat would have some delusional gimmick in mind for solving the investigation, but he hadn't expected it from Tsukauchi. Me. He wonders just what exactly they have in mind. They thought you'd be able to get through to me or whatever. Bakugo's grumbled answer from the corner wasn't what Aizawa had been expecting either. The blonde crosses his arms as he continues to growl, it's not about opening up. If I knew something about the nerd, I'd tell you. I seriously haven't seen him since he ran off. Suddenly, Aizawa has an epiphany. The connection with Bakugo reminds him that there are other students in his class who may also have ties with Midoriya. Todoroki had been mentioned by Eri, as well as Shinso, who he had taken under his wing ever since the sports festival. Actually, Bakugo isn't the only student under my tutelage with a connection to Midoriya. He starts to find the intel from the meeting all the more insightful now that he's actually got more leads. Bakugo shakes his head in dismissal of the possibility. The nerd didn't have any other friends besides me growing up. But Aizawa shakes his head too, these are more recent. Having all the more reason to be hopeful of these potential leads. They might know where to find him. Tsukauchi starts to catch on and agrees that they could make or break the case. Nezu folds his paws neatly, leaning back in his chair with as chipper an attitude as ever. Well, let's invite them in for some tea, shall we? His tiny grin implies that he sees more of an opportunity than they do. Does the name Izuku Midoriya mean anything to either of you? Aizawa stares down at the two boys seated on the most comfortable couch within UA's teacher lounge. He figured the setting would be much more relaxing than Nezu's office, and as such would make them more inclined to answer his questions. No? He was just hoping for a better answer from Todoroki. Well, not so curt, at the very least. 2. And Shinso's response happens to somehow be even worse. Aizawa refrains from slapping a hand against his face, instead opting for a glance towards Tsukauchi. The detective indicates that neither of them are lying, assuming that's the reason for the side eye. Okay. Let's try that again. The teacher sighs in frustration before attempting a different approach. How do you two boys know Akatani Mikumo? Shinso and Todoroki exchange a look between themselves, non-discreetly. A moment of silence passes before they face their teacher and the detective again. Why are you asking? Shinso asks with what sounds like a hint of suspicion. Aizawa likes to believe he knows the boy well enough from their training that he recognizes the tone as inquisitive instead though. Is Mikumo in some kind of trouble? Todoroki on the other hand is much more readable as concerned despite his usually stoic demeanor. Unfortunately, we can't disclose any information at this time. Tsukauchi chimes in from the sides to plug any potential leaks in the investigation that Aizawa could cause. Taking that as an indication to treat his students as a little more than children, Aizawa sighs once more before basically begging, please, answer the question. We first met in a coffee shop that he works at. Todoroki's heteromorphic eyes settle on Aizawa's gaze as he tries to gauge his teacher just as much as he's being studied. Antiku. I'm familiar with the place. Aizawa nods along but can't hide the disappointment in his tone. He was hoping that this would be a let to someplace else. Then he introduced me to Shinso. Todoroki passing the torch to the other boy does rekindle some of the underground hero's hope though. I knew Mikumo for longer. Especially when Shinso says that. Aizawa eagerly listens for the boy's backstory. When Shinso blushes in embarrassment, he isn't expecting the explanation he gets. We met at a quirk support group. Only after Aizawa mulls the answer over does he realize that makes sense. Shinso and Midoriya were both contemptuous of their own quirks. Regardless, he's relieved to discover something new that may help him and Tsukauchi find Midoriya. He asks, do you know if he still attends any of the meetings? We haven't seen him lately. Todoroki shakes his head as he answers for both himself and Shinso. His head then hangs somberly until he raises it again to ask, is he okay? Wanting to provide some form of comfort for his student, Aizawa assures him, that's what we wish to know too. Could you provide us with an address to that support group? Tsukauchi inserts himself to get things back on track and away from emotional vulnerability though. In his hands are pad and pencil to write things down. Aizawa isn't sure how he didn't notice the detective was taking notes until now. Sure. It might be worth checking still. Shinso goes along with Tsukauchi's request, while Todoroki seemingly stares off into space. Not wanting either of his students to be left to their own musings about the matter, Aizawa clears his throat to ask, "Is there anything else you might be able to tell us about him?" He has a younger sister named Yuri. But Shinso is still the only one to continue providing any intel. Though the info does hold its fair share of surprises, he said she's in America with her father right now. I see. Aizawa and Tsukauchi share a quick glance that's easily missed by the boys. Midoriya had lied about Yuri's caretaker to Shinso, considering Aizawa is currently her guardian, and he's far from America. Anything else? Tsukauchi continues prying for more information as he notes the potential relevance. No. But Todoroki finally speaks up to shut them down, that's all we know. Aizawa knows Tsukauchi will want to keep applying pressure, but he gives in before the detective can. Okay then. It's a judgment call only he can make considering they're his students. If there's anything else, you know to grab me after class. Before or during if it can't wait. He gestures for them to leave. Thank you for your time. You dismiss. Yes, sensei. See you at the summer camp. Todoroki is the first to stand. He gives a short bow before going, Shinso following shortly after him. Seems Midoriya keeps his friends at an arm's width. Tsukauchi finishes writing his final takeaways before closing his notepad and turning towards Aizawa. But Aizawa is much too consumed by his thoughts to return the gesture, if he even considers them his friends at all. The mystery of who Izuku Midoriya is himself is just as elusive as the people that he acquaints himself with. His strange girlfriend who's also an enigma. His childhood friend who is no longer in contact. Shinso and Todoroki. The Yakuza and Yuri. And that mask shop owner. Aizawa turns to face Tsukauchi, coming up with yet another potential lead based on his pure hunches. Yuta stands in the center of his store, gawping at the group of customers that currently occupy the space. Quite frankly, he hadn't encountered such an oddball group since the Yakuza, and they paled in comparison to this wacky bunch. All he can manage to get out of his mouth is an uttered under the breath, "What the fuck?" Standing beside him, Akatani Mikumo is well within earshot to hear it. And he has no qualms about agreeing with the mask maker. I know, right? One of the bunch that's been brought in is currently looking over a hockey mask. Hey, this one's pretty good. He grins while weighing it in his hand. I think I'll take it. He's a large muscular blonde with a missing eyeball, but yet somehow still doesn't manage to stick out from the crowd as the strangest. Not when a man in a black and gray skin-tight bodysuit agrees that it's not bad. Before immediately going back on his own word, it's horrendous. Too generic. Do you have any gas masks? There's also a boy in a school uniform. He looks younger than even Akatani and Himiko, the age of which one can turn to villainy bewildering. Yuta points in a general direction while giving better verbal directions, third shelf to your right. But his focus is still on the two that he knows the best. He turns back towards Akatani and Himiko. When I said bring your friends, I wasn't expecting. Disinterested in their conversation or shopping for a disguise, Dabi rolls his eyes before interrupting to ask, is it okay if I smoke in here? Yuta spares a quick glance towards Dabi, I'd rather you not. Before brushing him off. Dabi shrugs, I'd rather wait outside anyways. Heading for the exit, let me know when you're all finished shopping for Halloween. No fun. Himiko pouts as she watches him leave. Yeah. Party pooper. The man wearing a bodysuit agrees before going back on his word for a second time. This place stinks. I wanna leave too. The extreme bipolarism earns a few looks. One of the judgmentals is a villain covered in scales. I'm going to stick with my stain apparel, if you all don't mind. He's one of the few to already be wearing an outfit. You mean stain cosplay? Himiko teases him a little about the obviously inspired costume. It's not cosplay. But he's obviously touchy about the look. Pretty. So pretty. Another suited individual mutters to himself in a corner. He fidgets and twitches as he repeats himself, no, can't, no. It's as though the leather harness and straitjacket he's got on is barely enough to restrain whatever psychotic urges he's holding back. So uncivilized. A man with a top hat dismisses the odd character before lifting up a mask of his selection. It fits perfectly over his face. I've taken a liking to this one. Rather fitting to my theme, is it not? Meh. The bipolar villain both disagrees and agrees, dashing. You're all crazy. I'm joining Dabi outside. Another of the large group shakes their head in disapproval before also leaving. Much to Himiko's disavowal, oh, come on, Mag. Don't spoil the fun. This isn't exactly my definition of fun either, Himiko. We're not here to make friends. Akatani crosses his arms as he watches the crowd carefully. Tomoe and Kurogiri increased the number of members in such a short span of time. Now it's more enemies that'll have to die. But we're a team. We've gotta bond a little. Himiko grabs onto Akatani's arm so she can jerk and shake him per her usual exaggeration. It was her idea to go out as a group that he doesn't know whether or not she's caught on to the fact that the League are still enemies, and what better way than to go mask shopping. Flesh. Flesh. Pretty flesh. The reclusive villain in a leather straitjacket brings his knees to his chest as he continues muttering to himself. What he's saying doesn't go unheard by Himiko. See? You two sound like you'd get along. But when Akatani looks at the man, he sees the worst side of himself that he'd never want to associate with. He sees someone who's truly villainous and lost to the hunger of evil. He's not even sure if what sounds like a fellow cannibal is capable of functioning with the group. To lose oneself to the craze and never return. To lose all sense of self and be driven out of your mind. What he sees is what he himself could have become. What he could still become. He hates it. He hates them. Just like all the other villains. Hell no. Akatani's eyes burn as they glare at the cannibal. Sensing the boy's hostility and noticing the emergence of his Kakugan, Yuta tries redirecting the focus and attention back to himself. This isn't going to be a repeat of the Yakuza, is it? He recalls the last time things went awry and wishes to avoid another situation like that. Akatani gives a non-committed shrug in response. It's difficult to know whether he's joking or not when he says, "Don't tempt me." As if the ghoul needs any more reasons to get riled up, the leader of the league enters the shop to join them. He's currently got a hand attached to his face, red eyes peering out between the finger gaps. His gaze is just as angry as Akatani's as he barks a question, "What the hell's taking so long in here?" Himiko, undeterred by the harsh tone, makes a cheerful suggestion. "Hansi, you should get a new mask too." Her nickname for him earns a glare. "Don't touch father." Tamura protectively places his own hand over the one covering his face. "Father." Akatani doesn't miss the odd affection in Tamura's tone, as opposed to the usual disdain he hears. Neither does Yuta. This group is sounding more freakish by the second. He's clearly had enough of the bunch. Ignoring everyone's remarks, Tamura fixates himself solely on Akatani. He approaches the boy, stopping short by just a few feet to stand over him. "You, Ghoul. I want to speak with you." He tries giving an order. "That makes one of us." But Akatani isn't the least bit intimidated. Overhearing the interaction, the burly blonde member of the league excitedly turns to face them. "Ghoul. No way. You're just a kid." He grins ear to ear in amusement over their standoff, while also fantasizing the future. "Man, that makes me excited to see what you'll do when you're my age." Akatani's just further irritated when the muscular villain adds, "Big fan. I wonder what Stain saw in you." The Stain cosplayer with the retaliation mutation quirk also takes an interest in Akatani, upon discovering his identity as the Tokyo Ghoul. Akatani sighs. He'd rather deal with Tamura individually than have to handle the whole group of villains. Besides, Sensei restricts him from eliminating Tamura that he may as well play along for the time being anyways. Suddenly, getting out of here doesn't seem like such a bad idea. He agrees to speak with Tamura privately for his sanity's sake. "You can use the back office." Yuta helpfully gestures with his single hand towards the private area. To which Akatani gives a grateful nod in return, "Thanks Yuta." Tamura follows Akatani into the back room when he shuts the door so they can be alone and unheard. Akatani turns on the villain leader and asks, "So, what is it? What did Sensei want to speak with you in private about?" Tamura scratches under his chin down to his neck as he gets straight to the point. Akatani raises a brow, wondering why Tamura cares to know. That kinda defeats the purpose of a private conversation, doesn't it? He's not even sure if All for One wants his protege to know about their meeting anyways. "You work for me, brat. Just tell me." But Tamura quickly loses his patience. Knowing Tamura has a tendency to lash out when losing his temper and that he can't fight back, Akatani decides to just lie. "He was interested in my reputation and wanted to know my reasons for joining." He shrugs it off as no big deal, so the questioning can end, nothing special. "Nobody other than me ever caught his special interest before." But Tamura isn't quite convinced. "Well, your ranking on the scoreboard is impressive. I'm not convinced that you're more than an NPC just yet." Akatani rolls his eyes while thinking of the other people they're recruited. "Compared to the group that you put together here, I beg to differ." Clearly not expecting that sassy response, Tamura can't help but smirk beneath the hand covering his mouth. Maybe. Though he'd never admit to finding this snarky comment amusing. A brief moment of silence passes between the two, Akatani expecting to be asked another question. When nothing comes, he takes the opportunity for himself. "Can I ask you something now?" Tamura's smile quickly drops. "Depends." But he can't help but be the least bit curious. "When you attacked UA, who was your target?" Akatani eyes the villain as he searches for motive and reason other than causing havoc. He's not sure what it is that he'll find the longer that he stares. That wretched excuse for a hero, All Might, of course. Why? Tamura dismisses the question as though the answer is obvious though. Akatani thinks of Aizawa covered in bandages. He remembers Todoroki is part of that class. So everyone else was just collateral damage. He holds a grudge that only reignites tenfold, the more he thinks of how Eri could have also potentially been dragged into the conflict. NPCs always are. Tamura scoffs without any consideration that collateral damage is wrong. But he does find himself more intrigued by the ghoul. "Why are you so interested?" Akatani finds Tamura's eyes, green meeting red. Because not everyone is an NPC. He hopes his words resonate as he tries to speak in a language the villain will understand. You might have strength, but there's always someone with higher stats. Like yourself. Tomohiro narrows his gaze. He's taking it as a threat. Maybe. Which Akatani doesn't mind. Though he did originally mean all for one in regards to himself, hoping to reach Tomohiro through relatability for whatever reason. He shakes it off and regards it as just trying to know his enemy better. What's your quirk, by the way? Tomohiro doesn't respond at first. He takes a second to huff in laughter before grabbing his stray mask with 4 fingers. When the 5th joins the other digits, the mask starts to crumble. Would you really like to compare? Tomohiro holds his stare with Akatani as his quirk decays the face covering until there's nothing left. Akatani would be lying if he said he wasn't impressed, but he doesn't show it. You know you're gonna have to pay for that, right? He instead points to the pile of dust with a deadpan expression. Tomohiro tsks before facing away and placing his hand on the door handle to leave. Let me know when you're ready for Kurogiri to warp us out of here. He gives one last parting sentence of acknowledgement before exiting. Devil horns jut out from the top of the cardinal red mask in Yuta's hand. It's his most recent work of art, a wood-carved masterpiece painted to perfection. Tiny details like the number of fangs in its artificial mouth are counted for the same as pointed elf ears. The craftsman takes a second longer to admire his own work before placing it on a shelf with some of his other finished designs. Then, he hears the chime of his shop's door opening. He expects a customer to walk in and discover his latest tour de force, but instead finds himself face to face with 2 police officers, one of which he's familiar with. Yuta unenthusiastically greets the man in a futile attempt to hide his disappointment. Detective. I can't say it's too good to see you again. Detective Tsukauchi takes the cold welcome to heart, brandishing a document that he prepared just in case the shopkeeper tries turning him away. Which is why I brought a warrant. He holds the paper up to the store's neon lights for the mask maker to see clearly. But Yuta is looking past the form, his eyes instead on the officer that Tsukauchi brought with him. The store owner nods in the cop's direction, and back up. But when the detective turns around to also acknowledge his partner, he finds Tamikawa trying on a kitsune mask. The oblivious officer turns his attention towards them, tabby hat barely concealed by a similar cat covering. Huh. Tsukauchi rolls his eyes at his partner's antics, intimidation clearly off the table now. Not exactly. The detective sighs while returning his focus to the shopkeeper, more like moral support. What can I do for you? Yuta skips past the pleasantries and keeps his guard up anyways. He doesn't doubt there's a reason that the law is paying him a visit after all. Izuku Midoriya. Tsukauchi throws the name out to test Yuta. When the store owner doesn't react, he uses the boy's alias, Akatani Mikumo. The detective gets the reaction he was expecting, the masker's eyes widening. Those same eyes narrow when Tsukauchi uses the boy's nickname, the Tokyo Ghoul. Tsukauchi shakes his head before also getting straight to the point. Whatever you refer to him as personally, he's gone AWOL. Yuta looks away, trying to act natural as he asks, and what makes you think he'd come here? It's Tsukauchi's turn to glare. He crosses his arms while stating the obvious. It seemed to me that he was making the strobe lights either switch to a shade of red or Yuta blushes under the lamp's heat. Either way, he sheepishly rubs the back of his neck with his single hand. I made that for him a long time ago. He recalls the leather mask that Akatani now wears clearly. Tsukauchi raises a brow, his quirk registering that what Yuta said is the truth. However, the detective isn't ready to give up a potential lead just yet. This also serves as the perfect opportunity to ask. He hasn't come by to pay you a visit since then. No? Yuta immediately shoots down the question with as much feigned bravo that he can muster. However, no amount of confidence can trick Tsukauchi's lie detection. He levels his gaze with Yuta's upon registering the answer to his question is a lie. You do remember what my quirk is. Much to Yuta's credit, he doesn't break eye contact this time. He hardens his stare and swallows before also hardening his tone. Unfortunately, I do. A moment passes before Yuta tries giving validation for the reason that he's putting his foot down. He's just a kid. Tsukauchi exchanges a look with Tamikawa is finally put down the kitsune mask and joined him in his own stance. The officer motions to the handcuffs attached to his belt, but Tsukauchi shakes his head. The detective tries breaking through Yuta's rough exterior with compassion before taking such measures, which is exactly why we need to find him. Kids require guidance or they can wind up running with the wrong crowds. Which those words seem to do the trick, judging by how big Yuta's eyes get and his open-mouthed audible reaction. Oh shit. What? Tsukauchi isn't sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing though. He was with a group. They were all buying masks. Yuta staggers back like he's about to lose his footing and faint. Tsukauchi almost believes the mask maker actually will pass out when he presses a palm against his head. Tamikawa realizes why first, hair standing on end over the same revelation. They're planning something. He turns towards his fellow officer with mild panic starting to set in. Tsukauchi feels that same anxiety, pushing Yuta for more information. Can you identify any members of the group for us? Yuta shakes his head, face turning pale. Whether he's sweating from the heat of the store's lights, or if he's just that disturbed by what's happening, nobody knows, but it may as well be both. There were too many to go over. Yuta recalls the number of people in the group was high. And that's enough to plunge Sakauchi into action. The detective grabs a hold of his partner by the shoulders, grip tight as he orders, Tamakawa. Call Aizawa. I don't think he's gonna get reception from where he is. Tamakawa fumbles with his cell phone as he tries pulling it out of his pocket. Call him. But Sakauchi is already running to get in his vehicle. Unfortunately for both the detective and his partner, they wouldn't be able to contact or reach anybody in time for a proper warning. The League of Villains has already deposited its latest members on a mountain v Kurigiri's warp gate. The team stands right at the tip of a bluff, overlooking a vast stretch of forestry. Behind them is the open mouth of a cave, the moonlight hitting it just right that they're able to see through the shadows, but nobody can see them if anyone were to try. Are we going on a camping trip now? The reptilian-stained fanboy glances around the environment with mild interest. He's got the same attire he had on when visiting Yuta's shop, but now carries a massive mishmash of blades bound together with belts. It stabs the ground as though he's pitching it like a tent. Is this another bonding exercise? The more gentlemanly member of the bunch removes his top hat, so that it doesn't blow away in the breeze that brushes against his overcoat. And then there's the chaotic member with a bipolar personality. If the outdoors is so good, then how come all the bugs are always trying to get inside? Asking the real questions. Shut up, the whole lot of you, and I'll explain. Dobby snaps at them before pulling out a flask from his coat pocket. The constant bickering has driven him to take up drinking, having a swig every now and then, the only way for him to stay the only sane member. Booze runs down his scar chin as he discloses the reason for their drop-off. Our honorable leader confided in me that this is where our first mission is going to take place. Really? Akatani looks at Dobby with wide eyes. He wasn't expecting Tomura to give Dobby exclusive details, nor Dobby to keep those things a secret. The burned villain shrugs as though it's no big deal to have kept it hidden, but Akatani still can't cope with the slight feeling of betrayal. Flesh. The crazed cannibal is still among them, occasionally providing his less than helpful input too. Luckily, he's also still got on a leather straitjacket with straps restraining him. What are we supposed to do out in the middle of nowhere? The villain wearing shades raises a skeptical brow and places their hands on their hips, while questioning the integrity of Dobby's claim. To which Dobby rolls his eyes. It's not just the wilderness. And points towards the horizon of the tree line. Look. Everyone follows the villain's finger to find it aiming towards a collection of cabins in the distance. We have a target. They should be somewhere there. And the group comes to the same conclusion that they're supposed to raid whoever occupies the residence. Well, what are we waiting for? I'm itching to go. Let's hurry up and move. The muscular member of the villain stomps forward eagerly. Since Yuta's mask shop, he's adopted a look combining the hockey mask he bought with a hooded cloak to cover his body. Wait. It's too soon. We need to scope the place out first. Bide our time. The boy who bought a gas mask chimes in while trying to step in front of his much more imposing comrade. He nearly gets died and made you boss. Dobby shoots a quick glance over his shoulder with an expression of disdain. But Akatani stands up for the boy by agreeing. He's right. We don't know anything. He's sporting his own annoyed look behind his mask as he directs his next statement to Dobby. You didn't even tell us who our target would be. I usually like surprises, but we're supposed to be friends. Himiko sides with her boyfriend while giving an exaggerated demonstrative pout. Though the exaggerated movement and gestures do help convey her disappointment better than her facial expression, considering she's got on her own mask now. The loose black tube wraps around her neck like a scarf, decorated with pieces of pale metal to form the shape of a carnivorous grin. Our shadowy orchestrator has planned everything. There is sure to be sound reasoning behind it all. The elegant villain returns his hat to his head now that the wind has stopped blowing as hard. He seems to be siding with Dobby. Who the hell cares? Let us get down there. My blood's pumping over here. And the muscular villain is still as eager as ever to get the mission underway as well. Job. The crazed cannibal is drooling like a dog now, a job. However, his new word replacing flesh makes his standpoint clear. Shut up, you whack jobs. But Dobby disregards them all regardless of who they agree or disagree with. The only two he bothers acknowledging are Akatani and Himiko. He pulls out a photo of none other than Katsuki Bakugo, showing it to them first. No wonder I was the only one entrusted to know what we're doing here until now. But not without muttering under his breath how exasperated he is by the group's consistent commotion. Koch-chan. Akatani instantly recognizes his childhood friend in the picture presented. He's that guy from the sports festival. As does Himiko. She grabs onto Akatani's arm in an attempt to comfort him, already understanding the impact the revelation must be having on him. Dobby moves on from them to address the others. We're gonna retrieve this angry Pomeranian and keep him as a pet. Do not kill him. He's a potential recruit, not a bounty. Showing them the same photo. Buzzkill. The hulkish hooded villain grumbles over the order not allowing him to murder the target. But Akatani is still too busy processing the order himself to notice or care. This'll never work. What a stupid fucking plan. You don't think he'll join us? Himiko and you start to have a private whispered conversation separate from the main group. Koch-chan would never. He shakes his head at the mere thought that Koch-chan would become a villain for any reason whatsoever. But he also falters when Himiko asks him, not even if he sees you. Akatani and Himiko stare at one another, gauging each of their emotions despite the masks concealing their facial expressions. Akatani doesn't have an answer for the question he was just asked. He finds himself looking down at the rest of his outfit. Much like the large margin of others, he's adopted a full costume appearance. The form-fitting black makes up a combat suit, covered by a buttoned high-collar jacket. The sleeves are short, stopping at his elbows, the same as his pants legs cut off at the knees. However, tactical dark leather continues and covers what would have been otherwise exposed skin. He's not sure how Bakugo would react to seeing him like this, fully embracing the ghoulish persona. What you two talking about? Don't be flirting on the job. Akatani is suddenly startled by an arm being slung over his shoulder. He finds himself being jostled by the black and grey suited villain, much to his displeasure. Enough. Dabi barks for the Deadpool knockoff to quit goofing around before turning his attention to the youngest of the team. Oi, kid, think you can hit the forest with your mustard gas? He asks for support as a plan of attack begins to formulate. Huh? Oh, yeah. The boy's gas mask bobs up and down in confirmation when he realizes that he's being acknowledged. Then let's start a signal fire together. Dabi grins as much as his staple cheeks will allow and emits a blue flame from one of his equally marred hands. We'll begin putting them in their places. Now we're talking. The muscular villain cackles with glee before playfully slapping Akatani on the back. How about it, Ghoul? He's shocked to see Akatani doesn't stumble from the push. But he's even more surprised when Akatani doesn't respond with the same enthusiasm to get in on some action. I'm staying behind. We're mobilizing too early, and everyone here is a loose cannon. Dabi doesn't care, not bothering to read into it. He shrugs before sliding down the slope. Suit yourself, Akatani. But Himiko does pause to express an amount of concern. She looks her boyfriend imploringly in the eyes. The gaze he returns to her is soft, and she's soothed by his nod that it's okay for her to go, or rather, she feels it's a nonverbal request that she does go. So she nods back and does. Shall we? The gentleman of the group gestures for everyone to mobilize, and they begin to disperse one by one. Pretty soon, the only ones left at the mouth of the cave are Akatani and the brutish muscular villain. What's the big idea? Is it cause we're not allowed to kill that blonde kid? The hooded Hulk cocks his head to the side as he tries to guess the reason for Akatani staying behind. Akatani frowns, but tries not to show his annoyance otherwise as he responds, no. Nobody said anything about the others. Come on, we can still have a good old-fashioned massacre. Though it's proven much more difficult than one would imagine when he's interrupted by an enthusiastically carefree desire to kill. You? Akatani growls as he struggles to contain his own bloodlust. Though the muscular villain would probably be surprised to learn who that murderous urge is being directed towards. But before either villain can act upon the wafting aura, they're drawn to the sound of non-rhythmic taps. The source is a small pebble that bounces on the dirt of the hill when it reaches them. Akatani follows the direction that it fell from, spotting a boy that looks about Eri's age, staring down at them with a terrified look. Well. Akatani redirects his gaze with worry when the muscular villain stomps past him to get a view of the boy too, a face that isn't on the list. The small child is paralyzed with fear, and that's only knowing half the danger that he's in. Akatani starts to move for the boy too. What are you doing out here? Muttering under his breath in disbelief. Hey, that hat is pretty slick, kid. Why don't you trade me for this lame mask? The muscular villain towers over the child as he removes his faceplate to unveil his one-eyed monstrosity of a face. When Akatani catches a glimpse of the manic grin that's plastered there, his legs move on their own. Wah! The kid turns to run, but there's no chance of him escaping the muscular villain's raised fist. Not without Akatani swooping in to rescue him. The boy is transported in nearly an instant, wrapped in Akatani's protective arms. The crater is left in place of where the kid once was, his life saved. Eh? What are you doing? The one-eyed menace pulls his fist back from the indention he left in the ground, while staring at Akatani incredulously. Tendrils sprout from the ghoul's back, one of the limbs slashing the rock, and creating a mark much deeper than the one that the other villain made. Cross that line. The ghoul's single exposed eye now glows red as it meets the other one-eyed monster's gaze, and I'll kill you. The muscular villain's perturbed features last for only a second, replaced by the same earlier manic grin he had when attacking the young boy Akatani is swearing to now protect. Oh. I'm gonna have fun with you. He rips his cloak off to expose his huge physique, and muscle fibers begin to triple the size of those muscles. I hope the gang doesn't mind a small internal conflict between two powerhouses. Powerhouse. Fun. Watching the villain display his quirk gives the ghoul a different conception though. You're an all-you-can-eat buffet. Before engaging his opponent, Akatani takes care to safely place the boy he rescued in a tree with one of his tendrils. He can't have the child getting in harm's way or hindering his combat abilities. He also doesn't want to risk losing control of himself during the indulgence he's about to have when feasting on the muscular villain, not with the kid cradled in his arms. The one-eyed tank charges, no longer waiting for Akatani to safely distribute the child. The ghoul meets the attack head-on, unzipping his mouth covering and unleashing his Kagen. They collide with one another, full force put into their rushes. It takes all of his tentacles to stop the pressure of the muscular villain's punches, 2 at a time wrapping each arm by the wrist. With all 4 limbs occupied, Akatani grinds his feet into the ground to try and push forward himself. The dirt and rock crumble, the earth uplifting. A huge draft of dust envelopes the 2 villains as they struggle with one another. Akatani pulls downwards with his tentacles, forcing his enemy to the ground. That same tugging launches him skybound, resulting in a cartwheel kick aerial maneuver that connects with the back of the muscular villain's skull. Closing the distance, the ghoul takes the opportunity to sink his teeth in. The ghoul rips a chunk of flesh out from the villain's muscle fibers, slurping it down and swallowing it whole. The villain roars in a mixture of rage and pain, twisting in an attempt to knock Akatani off his back. The brute backs into the cave's wall, trying to use it as a means to crush his opponent. He's met with opposition, Akatani planting his feet and pushing back. Akatani then ducks under heavy swipe, taking a quick bite from the outstretched arm as he does. He rolls between the bigger villain's legs, getting behind him again. The ghoul goes for the calf muscles next, tearing into them. Another furious shout erupts from the hulking menace, as he tries to bring a fist down on the ghoul, cannibalizing him. Akatani leaps over the punch and lands on the villain's shoulder, chomping down. The villain shrieks, spiraling as he tries to grab the ghoul and throw him off. The 2 slam into the already dented cave wall, pebbles and dirt showering them. Akatani rips out another piece of flesh with his hands before finally getting flung off. He lands with an arm poised and the other cocked back, legs spread. Tentacles whipping around frantically like wagging tails, he moves along the ledge of the cliff with haste. The muscular villain is barely able to keep track of the speeding blur, almost missing a last-second block by raising his arms to deflect a tentacle whiplashing. The force of the blow does manage to knock him back though. He nearly trips over himself as he tries to defend against a second strike. Akatani flips backwards to avoid a counter-strike, and follows up with a 3rd swipe of his tentacles. The muscular villain snatches one of the limbs, ignoring the other 3 that slash open his chest. Then he uses the single tentacle as a pulley to hoist Akatani up and fling him across the mountain. The air pressure does more damage to the cliff, causing it to crack, than to the throne. Akatani spears the dirt with his limbs, planting them into the ground and stopping his momentum. But that's what the muscular villain wanted. He clears the distance with a punch primed to obliterate Akatani, who now has his body exposed. Akatani hadn't expected the big lunkhead to actually have half a brain cell. He raises his arms, doing his best to absorb the critical hit without taking too much damage, but finds himself being launched into a tree. The base of the trunk shatters into splinters, and Akatani spirals out of control before crashing through 3 more. The blowback only stops when he collides with another mountain wall. The force causes a miniature landslide, dirt pouring across the peak. He'd have been buried alive if it weren't for his survival instincts to grapple from there back into the trees. The muscular villain huffs as he shoves a robotic eye into his empty socket. Guess I'll have to take you seriously. Though he appears to clearly enjoy the thrill of the fight, judging by the grin that's returned to his face. Akatani growls as he darts from one tree to the next, utilizing the branches and their leaves as cover. He severs a few of them to carry with him as he goes along, coming up with a new plan. The rustling of the treetops draws the muscular villain's gaze, his eyes enhanced by the animatronic one. Since the ghoul is out of reach, he tries chucking a boulder instead. Akatani springs from his current tree to another, dodging the rock barreling towards him. Pieces of bark spray from where he once had been. The muscular villain laughs as he boasts, "Come back down here and fight like a man." Twigs snap and fall. The muscular villain's grin grows and he throws another rock. Except, he doesn't see the ghoul move to avoid the assault. Instead, dead tree limbs fall in his place. Having lost track of his opponent, he quickly turns to search another side of the cliff. More dead branches rain down from where leaves have been shaking. A diversion. A trick. The ghoul comes out behind him, able to get another bite in with his back turned. The muscular villain screeches, royally pissed off. The ghoul just continues his assault, tentacles ripping into the exposed muscle fibers as much as his nails do. Gnashing teeth destroy the makeshift armor of flesh easily. Blood flies left and right as the muscular villain gets torn into. The ghoul shows no mercy, bringing the villain to his knees as he pleads with agonizing cries for the torture to stop. Every new layer applied is just another platter set out to be eaten. Eventually, the villain would rather stop trying to shield his real body than to continue enduring his suffering. His screams are silenced once his throat gets torn out and eaten like the rest of him. What remains of the carcass slumps over once the ghoul is finished, now a lifeless husk of shredded meat. Akatani wipes his mouth with the back of his hand as he turns around to face the blue flames behind him. A rising inferno has overtaken the forest, burning it to the ground. Thick black smoke rises into the night sky, blending with the purple cloud that snakes through ashes. He can see the cabins in the distance are burning too, also shrouded in a colored fog. He remembers that the League of Villains are targeting Koch-chan. He remembers Todoroki is in that same class. He remembers Aizawa teaches that class. He worries that Aizawa may have thought it was safe enough to bring Yuri along. Akatani pulls the zipper on his mask, covering his mouth. Then, he gives the boy that he rescued a parting look, ensuring that the kid will at least be safe out of harm's way. And he dives into the hell below. Azure flames flail in blinding white flashes, flying from tree to tree in a rapid spread. The destruction is as swift as Akatani, the ghoul sprinting within the wildfire. Burning branches break off from charred trunks and transform to ash in the dense black air. Akatani's mask keeps him from swallowing the dark smog, but his heightened sense still revolts towards the acrid smell that chokes his lungs. Fumes fill what remains of the forest, stinging Akatani's eyes as he searches for anyone other than himself within the inferno. He's run deep enough into the withering wilderness that he's reached the equally charred cabins. The facilities collapsed, consumed by Dabi's fire. Akatani swallows as he peeks at the piles of burned wood. Nobody appears to be buried, but there's not a soul inside otherwise either. There's a chance that everyone was outside for a nightly activity and didn't get caught up in the conflagration. Or so he hopes. That's more than wishful thinking. Suddenly, a resounding boom shakes the ground and returns Akatani's attention to the burning forest. A major updraft of dirt came from the west where more sounds carries across the treetops. Signs of a fight. Signs of life. The ghoul takes off, breaking into another sprint. He's got more than enough energy to spare, his intake of muscular fibers giving him a massive boost. So when he comes across a thick tree trunk that's fallen in his path, he simply bounds over it. Akatani just isn't prepared for what he finds on the other side. The underground hero, Eraserhead, also comes to a dead stop. The two had intersected one another's routes on their way to the explosion source. Aizawa's pause lasts shorter than Akatani's upon initial reunion though. Having years of experience and training under his belt, the underground hero lashes out with his capture cloth to contain the Tokyo Ghoul. Akatani acts purely on instinct, evading the winding material with a twist of his torso that backs him into a burning tree. The flaming tree licks his back and pushes him back into the fray. Wait, Akatani tries talking Aizawa down, but clenches his teeth mid-sentence when he's forced to dodge another swipe of the hero's scarf. His calves tighten and his feet plant themselves firmly, body tensing in preparation to dart forward. Before he can use his strength to clear the distance between himself and his opponent though, a familiar feeling weakens the effect. Aizawa's hair rises above his head, reaching towards the sky like the flames that surround him and the ghoul. Behind his yellow goggles are red glowing eyes that lock onto the villain. Akatani's quirk loses its full ability, erasure slowing him down. He just barely manages to jump away from a third sweep of Aizawa's capture cloth. Eraserhead stretches a leg, taking out Akatani's. Akatani's back hits the ground. He doesn't need to see more than the sky to know he needs to roll out of the way of whatever attack is coming next. Aizawa lands in the spot that the ghoul once was. Akatani clambers to his feet, holding out his hands to try pacifying the hero again. But the underground hero wraps him in his capture cloth, binding his arms to his sides. You have a lot to answer for. Aizawa tugs on the cloth so that it tightens its hold. Akatani's struggles cease when he realizes he won't be able to escape without his quirk. But seeing his girlfriend creep up behind his captor helps him maintain his composure. Maybe some other time. Is his only warning to Aizawa before the blonde villainess leaps out from her hiding spot. Aizawa manages to duck under her attack, but that also forces his eyes off the ghoul. Akatani's quirk returns to him, allowing him to break free of the capture cloth's hold. The underground hero curses under his breath as he faces down the duo in front of him. Stop this while you still can. A shimmer of light that doesn't come from the fire draws Akatani's attention away from the hero. He's shocked to see it was a glint from a knife that Himiko has in her hand. Don't. He tries stopping her but gets interrupted by another blinding flash of radiance. He shields his eyes with his arms when a burst of flames overtakes the area. Our fight isn't finished yet, Eraserhead. Akatani uncovers his face and blinks to see Dabi has arrived as well. The underground hero is outnumbered 3-1 now, and lacks his weapon that's been reduced to tatters. Akatani can't help but wince in sympathy. But Aizawa isn't one to give up easily, making use of his environment by throwing up a handful of ash to blind Himiko. The blonde swings her knife wildly in response, trying to cut anything or anyone near her. Akatani hops back so that he doesn't find himself in the crossfire when the underground hero engages Dabi next. Why attack the summer camp? Aizawa grunts as he throws a punch at the villain he's currently locked in combat with. Wasn't my first idea. Akatani replies as he tends to Himiko. She rubs at her eyes as he wipes around the corners. He's not so sure Aizawa would believe him if he said he just found out what was happening anyways. You should be more worried about yourself than the kiddies. Dabi keeps Eraserhead's focus on him by unleashing another onslaught of blue flames. The wide spread of fire forces Aizawa back, tall trees catching the tail end of the attack instead. Suddenly, Akatani notices a drop in the temperature despite the heat of the inferno. A breath of condensation is his second warning before a stream of ice comes crashing through the undergrowth. The ghoul grabs Himiko and jumps away, the two of them avoiding becoming encased. Dabi, however, gets covered by the freezing force. Akatani turns his head, single exposed eye whitening when he recognizes Shoto Todoroki has also joined the battle. "Get away from my sensei." Todoroki's tone is cold-hearted as he steps into the small clearing that's been made from a combination of quirks in battle. Dabi sneers at his brother, not even bothering to squirm from within his ice imprisonment. "Son of Endeavor," is the only acknowledgement that he gives his sibling. His voice is just as frostbitingly bitter. Steam rises as the ice begins to evaporate. Dabi's heating himself up, melting away the casing. The rest crumbles and chips apart, so that the villain can break free, weakened enough from the opposing heat. Both brothers wind up for another attack, forcing Akatani to spring from his perch spot to intervene. Aizawa leaps in at the same time though, intersecting the trajectory. Akatani tumbles with the underground hero, away from the incoming crossing of fire and ice streams. He doesn't have enough time to brace himself before an eruption. A flashfire collides with an iceberg head-on, shattering it into flaming fragments. Huge chunks of burning glacier spread across the forest, coating trees with rime instead of flames. Akatani coughs as he fans away the updraft of smoke, ash, and frosty mildew. The zipper to his mask became undone in the explosion, exposing his gawking mouth at what remains of where his friends once were. Dabi's burns have increased, staples and stitches having popped loose, so that he's bleeding heavily now. As for the other Todoroki, he's not in the best of shape either, sprawled out in a crater. Himiko's bloodshot eyes water when she catches sight of Dabi, no. And she runs over to grab him before he can fall over. His legs give out at just the right moment, and he falls into her trembling arms. "Todoroki." Akatani staggers towards his other friend with just as much concern. The UA student looks confused at first, but then recognizes the villain that's worried for his well-being. "Akatani." Todoroki's white eyes stare in disbelief. As if the chaos is never ending, another disruption intervenes with a brief calm moment. A shadowy beast comes howling through the foliage, locked in combat with what looks like the cannibal Akatani had found himself compared to. He can see more of a similarity now that he sees what the fellow cannibal's quirk is, elongated teeth acting as limbs akin to the ghoul's kagin. The linked molars manipulate like web strings trying to snare a buzzing fly. The battle between some other UA student and the villain passes overhead, carrying over into another section of the woods. The fire in that part remains, still spreading and rising. Though the purple toxin that had been aiding in its extensive touch appears to be receding now. Rocks and bark scatter across the sky from the battle that crosses from one end to the other. Akatani looks between there and his own personal dilemma. As always back on his feet, reaching into one of the pouches on his hero uniform. Akatani doesn't know what to expect. Caltrops. Smoke pellets. Handcuffs. It doesn't matter though. He just knows not to let the hero get his hands on whatever it is that he's reaching for. Akatani unleashes his Kagyun and strikes Aizawa with one of the limbs. Not hard enough to kill or break any bones, but just the right amount of force to stop a fight before one can begin. "Sensei." Todoroki exclaims in shock before redirecting his gaze at who he had believed to be his friend. Once white and heteromorphic eyes now glower at the boy, Akatani. Flames ignite from Todoroki's one side, making Akatani reckless. The bright orange glow rekindles the scorched trees that make up their area, finishing the job and making them finally collapse. Several thick trunks fall left and right, causing the ghoul to scramble in order to avoid being crushed. The flames lead him to find Himiko knocked unconscious, Aizawa was standing over her with a hand covering a bloody side. Before he can react though, more trees land in his way. Sharpened teeth return, stabbing through the forestry. The ghoul swings his tentacles at them, shattering the molars. The shadow monster that had been fighting the other cannibal villain appears to have been affected by the flames, shrinking in size. More elongated teeth replace the ones that were broken. Akatani carries himself away from the sharpened fangs to regain his bearings. The villain towers over the forest, teeth jutting out and lifting him to such heights. Akatani looks back down at where the fangs stab into the dirt surface. He figures if he destroys them all that the villain will come falling down. And so he does. The ghoul viciously slashes with his Kagyun at the teeth pillars, leaping from one to the next as support beams. With the carriers severed, the fellow cannibal can no longer hold himself up. Akatani steps forward to finish the job, but stops when he feels pain once applying pressure to his leg. Through the adrenaline rush, he hadn't realized that one of the teeth has snared him. A deep gash slowly heals itself. It's a mild handicap, but one that slows him down. It's a temporary weakness that leaves him vulnerable to an attack he doesn't see coming until it's too late. An explosion comes out of seemingly nowhere, flaring up his back and forcing the air from his lungs. Torn leather melts and bubbles with the blisters of exposed flesh, as Akatani skids across the dirt mound of an equally charred surface. His vision blurs as he bites down his pain. When he's able to see clearly again, he has to blink twice to make sure that he's seeing correctly. You want a fucking piece of me? Well, here I am, asshole. None other than Koch-chan stands atop a scorched boulder with miniature sparks popping from the palms of his hands. Akatani trips over himself as he tries to get away. He's not ready to face his past. Especially not in his current condition. But Koch-chan knows what he is. A monster. A villain. Get back here, you shitty scumfuck. And the hero in training doesn't let him off the hook so easily. The ghoul raises his appendages, shielding himself from a blast that sears the skin that's been exposed through his suit. He tries using a tail to push off and get away, but Koch-chan lets loose another explosion that stops him in his tracks. The fight is kept grounded and in close, detonations purposeful and not as reckless as they appear to be. Akatani raises a tentacle to separate himself from his attacker, but another explosion goes off directly in his face. He's rocked from the blast, mass charred and flickering with small flames. He reaches for something to brace himself, and grabs onto Koch-chan's wrist. Big mistake. The living firecracker spins like a bottle rocket using his free hand to let off a round of explosions. Dizzied from the spin, Akatani is unable to resist being lifted up and over, and then body slammed. Akatani isn't expecting the cold rush that hits his face once his mask is pulled off. Not with the heat wafting through the air around he and the camp. But it's almost refreshing as much as it is unexpected. He feels his head become less clouded and his vision refocuses. Koch-chan has him pinned under his weight, a hand primed and ready with the palm glowing a subtle tinge of orange. The glow fades when Koch-chan's snarl shifts to an expression that mimics Akatani's. Izuku. The blonde boy speaks despite being breathless. The dark in the ghoul's eyes are as warm as the night. The tiny red orb at the center of the cracked web stares back at Koch-chan's equally crimson gaze. Then, a blue coating consumes the UA hero in training, and he's shrunken smaller than the ghoul's pupils. The villain with the top hat stands in Koch-chan's place, holding a small marble. This turned out to be easier than anticipated, eh? And he reaches out to Akatani with his free hand. Akatani falters, but then realizes Koch-chan was just compressed and captured. He sits up despite the pain that shoots through him, and reaches out to accept the extended hand. Easy isn't exactly the word I'd use. He's still breathless from the entirety of all that's transpired, but it does feel good to finally lower his guard. Though that's his mistake. Since if he hadn't relaxed, if he had still considered the other villains his enemies instead of trusting them as comrades for even a split second, he maybe would have seen his own capture coming. The villain's fingertips brush up against Akatani's, and the ghoul is turned into a red marble that contrasts his childhood friend's blue bowl. No? I suppose you wouldn't. The villain rolls them both between his fingers before shoving them into his coat pocket and leaving to reconvene with the rest of the league. The villains twice and Mr. Compress had gotten acquainted with one another after joining the League of Villains. Through their mutual associate, Kurogiri. The barkeep had sat them down with a shot of whiskey each to speak about a private matter. It turns out that who they had originally believed to be leading the villain organization wasn't actually in charge. Even Tomura Shigaraki answers to Sensei. A television monitor was placed on the bar counter, and from it the voice of the league's true leader spoke. For your upcoming assignment, I personally have a separate mission for you two to conduct. The deep foreboding tone left no room for questioning or refusal. Each villain downed their shot of whiskey right then and there, prompting Kurogiri to refill their glasses. You will not just be capturing and retrieving Katsuki Bakugo from UA, but another prospectively transferable student. The reason for this silent meet is that he is already assumed to have joined our ranks. Kurogiri showed them a photo of Akatani Mikumo for elaboration, and it must be done just as subtly as this arrangement. A plan had been made that night. Twice would plant the idea in Mikumo's girlfriend's head that it'd be a good idea to team bond by getting everyone a makeover. That's how Twice would have the opportunity to measure Mikumo, granting him the ability to make a clone with his quirk. You will replace him with the copy so that the other members of the group remain none the wiser. It goes without saying that Tomura in particular does not know of this side quest, as he would call it. And then the plan would be enacted with only Twice and Compress, knowing of All for One's hidden intent. Which members who were aware of Bakugo's capture was also kept to a minimum in order to avoid suspicion of an ulterior motive. Dabi being the most detrimental. All for One was fully aware of the burn victim's family history, and took advantage of it as a way to gain his silence too. Dabi's fixation on his brother at the summer camp as a motivation to participate would blind him to looking closer or seeing a problem with keeping the plan a secret from his friends. Since All for One was also well aware of Mikumo's past with Bakugo as Izuku Midoriya, and how that would negatively affect his scheme, he had to take such a precaution. It wouldn't be until after Mikumo is already on site that he should learn of the mission. The strategy worked in All for One's favor, gaining his new experimental protege, with his current one being none the wiser. The clone of the Tokyo Ghoul was fed a lie that he is the original, so that he wouldn't act any differently from his real self either. He would go along with them once he saw his childhood friend was caught unharmed and suspect nothing. And with everyone else in the league preoccupied either searching for Bakugo or combating the heroes stationed at the camp, they would suspect nothing either. Twice climbs up a hill with the clone he created of the Tokyo Ghoul, each of them heading for the rendezvous point. Kurogiri provided coordinates and a compass for them to find where the warp gate exit would be. The time frame from arrival to departure was deemed also detrimental in the makings of the plan, adding haste to the flow of action, leaving no room for error. So once the two arrive at their predetermined destination, they find Mr. Compress already there. The villain leans on his cane, having waited patiently, only twirling it from his prop position to standing once he notices them. It's about time. Compress presents the 2 marbles in his hand for Twice's sake before placing them back in his pocket, and here I was beginning to think that I must do everything myself. Each of the conspiring villains held up their ends of the plan, success but assured. Now it's just a matter of carrying out the final act for a proper conclusion. Shut up. We're early. Twice shouts back incredulously as though he's offended before doing a double take and apologizing. I can't believe we got here late. Sorry, pal. Regardless of which outburst he feels more sincere about, he winds up pausing afterwards when actually taking in his surroundings and asks, "Where's everyone else? You might have had it right the first time. Are we early?" Akatani's clone speaks up when he realizes he has no conception of time. Under his mask, his face scrunches up in confusion. He has no recollection of how he winded up with Twice in the woods. The last thing he remembers is adamantly refusing to join them in the raid. The problem with the clones Twice makes is that they all share memories with the host up to the point of creation, making any brief period in between null and void. Compress slides back the sleeve covering his wrist to check his watch. We're right on time. And as though on cue, the undergrowth behind him begins rustling. The leaves shake and twigs snap, making way for whoever's coming through. Akatani's clone tenses in anticipation, sharing the same ghoulish instinct as his host. Twice cocks his head to the side, expecting a bunny rabbit or something as equally cute from nature. Compress pivots, facing the same direction the others are looking with a feeling that's in between those two. Nobody expects Spinner and Magni, the Stain fanatic and Himiko's big sis, to be the ones who come running out from the weeds. Especially for both of them to be covered in so much blood, panting frantically. Magni's sunglasses are missing, probably broken in whatever skirmish that she found herself in. Spinner's magenta hair is messied, and his already tattered clothes are even more torn. The two sporting their disheveled appearances stagger over to their comrades. Those hero kids are crazy. Spinner gasps in between huge intakes of air. He sounds as traumatized as he looks. The massive makeshift weapon he had been carrying back when they arrived is noticeably missing. They got mustard. The kid won't be making it back with us. Magni reports the loss of a comrade with a shake of her head. The downtrodden demeanor meshed with Spinner's look makes for a colorfully imaginative turn of events. How they were beaten and why the mustard gas evaporated so quickly during their attack crosses everyone's mind with different ideas or reimaginings. Practically a perfect replica of Akatani, the clone's recalled friend still missing from the rendezvous point after receiving this news causes him to worry. "Where's Dabi and Himiko?" he asks. "Playing hooky." Twice gives an unhelpful suggestion that earns a glare from the Tokyo Ghoul's copy. Sensing the clone's hostility, Twice holds up his hands in mock surrender before trying again, or they could just be dead, you know. Though that one's probably worse. If they're not here soon, I'm afraid we'll have to leave without them. The compress is quick to redirect the Ghoul copy's glare. Even Spinner and Magni are taken back by the villain's careless comment. Everyone knew the risks involved when they joined. It doesn't help that he does a poor job of defending himself. We can't just abandon our partners. Spinner argues with the other villain through bared teeth. Akatani's clone's mask shares a striking resemblance. I agree. Twice raises his hand courageously, before immediately swinging it down and frantically shaking his head. I disagree. He adamantly goes back on his word as always. Magni facepalms, I should have just gotten a regular job. Regretting her decision of joining the chaotic club. As equally annoyed, Akatani's clone starts to head for the woods. Twice notices first and calls after him, "Hey, where are you going? We shouldn't wander from here at this time." Compress turns to see the sudden cause of commotion and forms a pit in his stomach at the thought of their plan falling apart when they've already come so far being so close to success. The clone of Akatani doesn't bother stopping, nor does he even spare a glance back. "Go ahead and leave without us if you want, but I'm not abandoning Himiko or Dabi." His resolve is loud and clear with his only responsive acknowledgement. Just like his host, he has a one-track mind. Stain was right about you. Spinner whispers to himself with admiration twinkling in his eyes. Hastily, he hurries after Akatani's clone with an almost desperate urge to tag along. Wait, I'll help. But before they venture off, they're fortunate enough that Dabi and Himiko find them first. Though the two are in extremely bad shape. Himiko. Akatani's clone rushes to take what his mind tells him is his girlfriend from Dabi's arms. The blonde girl is unconscious, body limp. Dobby looks like he went through hell and back to carry her, collapsing in Spinner's arms. I've got you. Spinner holds Dobby upright as blood soaks into his torn fabric. The villain's burns have increased in spread, dried purple skin remelted and red muscle tissue exposed. Akatani's clone pulls his mask off, pulling Himiko closer. Hey, you gotta wake up. He pleadingly stares at her closed eyelids with the hope that they'll open. Hey, they're okay. Twice remains obliviously ignorant with a childlike innocent happy reaction, as opposed to Compress and Magni's quiet and reserved grim responses. That is, until somebody else comes crashing through the undergrowth. The white lens of Twice's mask widens when he sees none other than a Eraserlead leap out from the bushes. Oh shit. Though the underground hero does give pause when he sees what looks like Akatani without his mask on. Seeing the boy's actual face is different from combating the Tokyo Ghoul when wearing his guise. Suddenly, the harsh reality of the situation hits Aizawa and stops him in his tracks. We have to go. Now. Compress urges everyone to retreat through Kurogiri's portal, while the hero is distracted. Twice doesn't think twice, fleeing with a girlish scream into the warp gate. Magni runs in right behind him, minus the yelling. As Spinner drags Dobby and Akatani's clone carries Himiko, the ghoul's copy meets Aizawa's gaze. They each share a sad exchange through their stare. Then Akatani's clone bids the hero farewell with these parting words, "Don't come for me." Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to me, and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-ifs coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination. Goodbye everyone.